This is Jonathan Banks, and you are listening to the Boxing Asylum Nuthouse.
And first of all, I want to thank Al Ayman, the best manager in the world.
He's the fucking champion of the world!
Nuthouse Stevenson, piece of shit.
No, I think Rosado, good boy. Rosado is a good boy.
I've become a massive international superstar. It's as simple as that.
I eat your asshole alive, you bitch! Scared of the real man. I'll fuck you till you love me, faggot.
I'm going to physically shoot David Hay. He fucking glassed me. He glassed me. Derek, put down.
I'm Shannon Briggs. I'm hard to kill. I'm the Black Steven Seagal. I'm hard to fucking kill.
Welcome everyone to the 82nd edition of the Box Asylum Nuthouse podcast, brought to you by boxasylum.com. I'm your host Danny Patterson. With us today I've got Alistair McDonald, Kurt Ward and the big boss man Tommy Allen. First off the bat, I like to congratulate all the fathers out there. Happy Father's Day. And we'll start off with commiserations and congratulations for Brian Rose. Commiserations that he got an absolute hammering last night, and congratulations. I don't know if we should call it congratulations, but he's actually signed his life away to get married, I believe. So anyway, Brian, all the best with that one in all seriousness though. Starting off, Kurt, you know, last night, let's not beat about the bush. Brian Rose was the human version of a punching bag there last night. No head movement, no body movement. You know, I said last week, I still wasn't 100% sold on Andrade, but last night Rose made him look like a pound for pound fighter there.
Well, yeah, I mean, I don't want to sound too harsh on Rose because, you know, he's done well for himself. You know, I said last week that I thought he was domestic level, you know, and he got his shot, he got a payday out of it, and, you know, he got his chance. But that fight reminded me of when we see our British prospects face a pregnant Latvian or a Brazilian road sweeper like we're going to get with Tony Bellew soon. It was just a guy who was just had no chance of winning, and he was just beaten up, and it was not good to see, to be honest. I mean, it was just not competitive in the slightest, and, you know, this is the problem with the rankings. You know, like I said, nothing against Rose, but you want to see a guy, you know, have to face another top quality opponent, in my opinion, to get a shot at the title. And in my opinion, Rose has never done that. He's faced a certain level of fighters, you know, been knocked out as well, but come back, avenge that. He's faced a couple of faded fighters. He beat Alcine, who, you know, in a tough fight, you know, Macklin stopped him in a round, and he's got a title shot off it. You know, he's not his fault, but if he has to face a test to get a mandatory shot, you know, then you can say, well, he deserves it, and also he's got the experience of facing another quality opponent and coming through it, and he just hasn't got it. And as he goes in with a guy like Andrade, the golfing class is just too much, and he isn't prepared for it, he isn't ready for it, and he's got no chance. And we've seen it quite a few times with the British fighters, and it's just not good to see. It's the ranking system, guys. You know, promoters can use the politics and the bullshit, and they can get these guys in excellent positions. I mean, a lot of these guys who are mandatories, you know, the fans, they defend it by saying, oh, well, he's deserved it, but in reality, how many of them actually do really deserve it by beating a quality opponent? In my opinion, it's not many.
Alistair, you know, give me your takes on the fight, mate, but also as well, you know, just elaborate a wee bit more on what Kurt was mentioning about the ranking system. And furthermore, Glenn McCrory was pretty much on point last night by saying, you know, who has Rose actually faced, you know, in the build-up to that fight to actually get him up to world level, because it was solely lacking there last night.
Yeah, well, that's exactly right. He's fought international fighters in the sense that he's fought fighters that aren't domestic, like Alcine, who, you know, arguably he beat last time out, but the jury is very much out on that one still. He hasn't really developed that kind of body of work that suggests that he is world class, and even if he did legitimately beat Alcine, the jumping class between Alcine and Andrade and the Matrosians, even, who I didn't rate that highly at 154 at the moment, it's cosmic and it's really clear to see. So I don't think that Rose had done anything to really justify his position, and it's the rankings that are to blame for that. And I think, the commentary last night on the fight, a lot of it was making out that Rose is indicative of the quality of British boxing. I don't think that's the case at all. I think, as Kurt said, we didn't regard Rose as being much above domestic level, if above domestic level at all. This is really indicative of the way the rankings work and how you can end up with quite perverse fights, being title fights in boxing these days. And it's a shame, really. I mean, Rose, he seems like a nice guy. He's worked very hard. He's been in some very good domestic fights, but he was just massively out of his depth last night, and it just led to a title fight that was frankly a bit of a joke.
It was just, as I say, just off air, actually. Apologies to our listeners again, actually. Sorry about the live feed. We've had some technical problems trying to get out live and recording at the same time, so unfortunately I had to record the show. I mentioned to my wife the first minute of the fight, I says, Rose has got no head movement, no body movement, and then boom, left hand in the middle and he's dumped on his arse. Bobby Rimmer saying to him in between rounds, I think it was after the first round, you got to move your head. He goes back out in the second round, does exactly the same thing, taking punches. I said it last week, Andrade doesn't really punch with authority with a jab, but it's a sneaky left hand that comes in behind it. And I say, again, Rose made that guy look like he was elite level, which I don't really think is the case yet.
I don't know about everyone else, but it reminded me slightly of Michael Jennings when he went to face Miguel Cotto, when it was just, he was basically went over there to get bashed up, basically. And like I said, again, that was the rankings, that somehow Jennings was, hilariously up there that high, and to go in there with someone like Cotto, which the levels, it's just it's a bit embarrassing. And I thought it was the same yesterday. And like Al said, Rose is a nice guy, and he believed that he could win, but it didn't take long to realise that he was a mismatch of epic proportions.
It was very, very gun shy, very, very early, wasn't it? I mean, he didn't seem to kind of want to let his hands go at all, Alistair, until maybe fifth or sixth round, when I think he knew he had to do something to try and change the tide of the fight.
Yeah, and I think just before the stoppage he was designed, because usually when the guy's pinned against the ropes like that, if he wants to stay in the fight and the ref not to stop it, you'll let your hands go just to show that you are punching back, and he didn't do that. And it was like I said, it actually reminded me more of Lockett and Pavlik in the sense that Andrade was just able to tee off on him in the same way that Pavlik was to Lockett. I think Jennings tried to run out the clock, I guess. But yeah, it was just a horrible mismatch, really. It's a shame. It doesn't tell us anything about Andrade, really. Either, or Andrade, as he pronounces it.
Andrade, I keep calling him Andrade, sorry. It's just like listening to that other guy, the Canadian version. Yeah. But I mean, the HBO, I didn't listen to the HBO broadcast, man. I think there's been some comments relating to British fighters last night. We want to let us know what happened there or what was said.
Well, they all praised Rose, and rightly so, for his toughness. I mean, he didn't just fall down and go out there. He tried to stick it out. He took a lot of punishment in that fight. I know we don't look at Andrade as a puncher, but he was nailing him with some big shots, and his nose was pretty busted up, and he was there to try and win. He was definitely there, but that it just, to me, it doesn't look good on British boxing on the world level, because HBO viewers are seeing this, and I think Alistair said it earlier, they're thinking, Brian Rose is one of the best of British, I presume, and, it doesn't look good, but again, it's the rankings, and what can you do about it? I mean, we've got another one coming up with Paul Smith, getting a shot at Arthur Abraham. Now, he's beaten 3 guys since he was knocked out by George Groves, who have got a combined record of about, 30 wins and about 150 losses. But he's getting a shot because he's ranked, I think, number 5 by the WBO, and let's say it for what it is. Sauerland are looking at it as an easy fight, and Abraham's looking at it as an easy payday, and that's what it probably will be. And again, you can't blame Smith. He's going to get the opportunity. He's going to go there believing he can win. But again, I just want to see a guy deserving to be, into the title shot, and not just being sent over there. And yeah, the fans will also afterwards, oh well, at least he got a payday. Well, that's fair enough, but in a sport, we don't want to see, good fighters that get, in football, for instance, we don't want to see the top teams playing against, the Accrington Stanleys of the world. You want to see a competitive sport, and you're always going to get top fighters, and they're going to be much better than their opponent, but at least be deserving of a shot. That's all I ask.
I know you never saw any of the fights, mate, but, you know, as Kurt mentioned there, you know, these matchroom fighters are getting big paydays to go abroad. At the same time as, you know, if you think back, Lee Purdy, Gavin Rees, Brian Rose, there's a good possibility that Paul Smith will probably get a beating off Abraham, even though he's shot the shit.
Darren Barker as well. With
Darren Barker,
Barker, yeah.
You know, for instance, you know, against Martinez and probably Tony Bellew as well. You know, these guys are getting good money. So at the same time as should Matchroom, you know, even though Rose was out his depth last night, should they just be saying, right, okay, go and take the money and get a beating, or should they maybe be actually trying to protect these guys and say, listen, you're not ready yet. You need to get more fights at a higher level before you even go in there, or do you just think, you know, so that we'll just take the money?
Well, that doesn't it. When you compare Frank Warren's stable and you've got Eddie Hearn's, what you really want is a combination between both, because obviously Warren, he holds on to the fighters too long, and obviously Hearn, they're getting good pages, but he's throwing them into the wolves. They're going to pick the loss up, aren't they? Ideally, you'd want Hearn to try and secure them a fight in the UK, try and build them a bit more. Obviously, secure them the fight in the UK, and obviously against not against some of the champions that they've been going against. I didn't really know what to say. What he's doing, he's taking his fighters home, and they're constantly losing fights. I think he got paid £100,000 last night. So when you divvy that £100,000 up between the trainers, promoters, you know, whoever maybe manages them,
less than that, mate. Dollars he got paid there last night.
Dollars. So he's probably fought for about £10,000 last night for a world title fight when his money clears, you know. So was it really worth doing that?
That's what I mean. I mean, it's easy saying life-changing money, but what is life-changing money? Is that life-changing money?
Pay in his corner. I mean, I would say, what was it, $100,000, maybe, but what, £80,000?
But lucky to clear 10 grand, 20 grand.
I mean, the thing is, I think but Matchroom would probably clear the TV money from Sky. So basically, as they're allowing, they're basically having HBO or the American promoter pay Rose his purse. So there's Matchroom making, I don't know how much money they make off Sky, but they would have made a nice wee profit off that fight last night with minimal risk financially.
The thing is, you know, we saw recently the Cal Brook-Sean Porter fight go to New York August the 9th.
That's another version.
I saw her an interview last week where he was asked why he didn't, you know, try for the purse bid, and he said, I think that it was 75-25, it would be in favour of Porter, and Porter's team made it plainly obvious they had no interest in coming to England. But if Eddie Hearn had took it to purse bids and won, then Porter's team have got a choice. They either do what they don't want to do and come to England, or vacate. And then Cal Brook's in with a great chance, probably in Sheffield, of getting a title. But he doesn't go for that. And with Frank Warren, he gets his fighters home fights. I mean, we all realise, you know, looking back, the Kovalev fight was a mistake, but at least he got it in Cardiff for cleverly and gave him all the opportunity to try and win that fight. But I just think some of these guys, I mean, yeah, Brian Rose, he wouldn't have won that fight, you know, in his back garden, but so it's like, it seems to be just a recurring thing that all these guys are going abroad and they're having it stacked against them.
Yeah.
For what it's worth, though, I think the Abraham Smith fight is probably the best chance he's got at making a heist, because that's probably the one fight where I'd say, well, he's probably catching a guy, possibly going to catch a guy in the slides, and if it's Paul Smith that happens to be the guy that he owns that's in the rankings to take that, I mean, Groves or De Gale or somebody who'd had a better shot, but that one's almost Warren-esque in the fact that they're catching a guy on the slide.
Yeah. The thing is, if you look at it, if Smith loses and Brook loses, that's Matchroom fighters must be close to about double digits who have all lost on the road in world title fights.
Yeah.
That would never happen under Frank Warren. And I know Frank Warren gets shot on quite a fair bit. We've shot on him a fair bit, you know. But at the same time, you've got to give him credit. You know, his track record speaks for itself. You know, there's a fighter there last week he's taken up from the bottom, Paul Butler, and got him to a world title fight, even though if you wanted that argue the fact as if it was a genuine world title or not. But you know, I think something they need to try and change something. I think Matchroom and try and get the fighters hometown advantage.
When you look at the Germans and that, Matchroom have got to be in a better position than a lot of these guys at Sutherland and that, but they're still managing to secure their guys world title fight after world title fight on home soil too, aren't they?
That's what I mean. I mean, how many times do you see Abraham, Hock, Hernandez going abroad?
Never, doesn't harm, does
They're
it?
getting their title shots. They're investing in their man. They're believing in their man, and they're getting him every advantage. I mean, I can understand Paul Smith. They're not going to go out their way to get the fight over here because they probably don't. In all fairness to Smith, they don't see a lot in him. And that's the way it is. And he's getting a shot. But like I said, I don't blame him or them for making that fight. It's just that I don't think he should be in a fight based on his recent opposition. It's pretty poor. And if you think of someone like Ricky Burns, when he was made, who did he make his first title defense against? He made a couple of against that was
Everson.
Yeah, that were heavily criticised.
Yeah.
But someone like Burns will be criticised and say, oh, why is he defending against basically shite? But then they'll say when, Paul Smith or Brian Rolls get a shot, well, fair enough, he's going for it. I mean, so it works both ways. I mean, if these guys can make these defences and, they're going to do it then.
Just moving on the card, lads, it was quite a decent fight, the main event fight between Chris Algieri and Ruslan Provodnikov for WBO light welterweight title. First off, Kurt, Alistair, how did you score the fight? That fight, sorry.
I didn't actually score it, but keeping track in my head, so you've got a 3-point lead for Provodnikov in the first, and then I thought the rest of the fight, it was very close. I probably would have had it a draw across those rounds, which would have given me, in my head, probably just edging it to Provodnikov, but it was close. I did the round by round card though.
Right, I had it 114-112 to Algieri. Kurt, how did you score it, mate?
I scored it to Provodnikov, I think 115-111, but it's one of those fights where I got no problem with Algieri getting the win, because it's just one of those fights where it's what you like, and you got one guy who's just coming forward, applying pressure, not really landing much, but when he does land, it's he's pushing the head back and it's eye-catching, and you got the other guy who's obviously a much better boxer, who's on the back foot and being sound defensively, landing more, but they're pretty much not having much of effect. So it's just what you like. I mean, I think there's a lot of close rounds in that fight, and I think with Fight Score Collector, I think this is going to be one of those fights where you're going to have all different kind of scores, where usually you have a huge amount of scores around the same, and then you got a minority of some, but I think this one, they're going to be all over the place. And I think at Algieri, he really impressed the way he boxed and the way he fought in there, especially after the first round, and he was taking some leather, and you can't really begrudge him the victory the way he fought.
Any comment on the Max DeLuca scorecard, 117-109 for Provodnikov? That's not an 8-point fight, lads.
No, that seems too much for me. I mean, like I said, Provodnikov he was obviously frustrated, and I thought he looked quite tired as well in the second half of the fight. Algieri was landing to the body, and Provodnikov, he said it after the fight, he doesn't like those type of fighters. We all knew that. I mean, when Bradley chose to box and move, he didn't really have much of a chance. It was only when he stood and traded that's when he got in trouble, and Algieri in the first couple of rounds, he was getting caught in the corner, but after that he was moving a lot, and Provodnikov just can't deal with that type of movement.
That's the first time I've actually ever seen Algieri fight, Alistair, and in all honesty, I was very impressed with his skills. His injury, he's actually got a very good injury, because going into the championship rounds, his first ever, I think it was his first 12-rounder he fought there last night as well. So to keep it going for as long as he did, especially with a bad eye injury from the first round, it's like a testament to the guy's character in the ring, because he didn't panic at any time. He could easily have looked for a way out, especially against a power puncher like that. But good boxer.
Yeah, I was very impressed. I was very impressed the first 2 minutes of the fight. I mean, he's a slightly hyperactive fighter. His gas tank's phenomenal to do what he did for 12 rounds, because he a lot of foot movement, a lot of upper body movement. A very hyperactive guy. The first 2 minutes I was quite impressed, and then he got knocked down quite badly, and I was like, oh damn. I was expecting it to be pretty much done and dusted then, and just to see something similar to the Alvarado stoppage, but we didn't. He boxes very well. He's got very good footwork and gives very good angles, and he's got this sneaky left hand. He did a combination that I really liked quite a lot last night. He'd hit with the left uppercut and then immediately snap Provodnikov's head back with a really hard left jab straight behind the left uppercut, which is a slightly unusual combination, but he made it work very well for him. Doesn't look like he has a particular amount of power, but his conditioning and his speed and stuff was very, very good. And he was also very tall and big for the weight, I thought. So it'd be interesting. I mean, I would probably, based on last night, I could see him giving Alvarado and Rios issues. I'm not saying he would beat them necessarily. I mean, he'd probably have a better chance against Rios if he could keep him at distance than Alvarado, who makes people mix up a bit better, I think. But he's definitely somebody in the mix of that weight class, and it didn't really show that he hasn't. I mean, they said he took up boxing at the age of 23 and he was a kickboxer before that.
World champion in kickboxing, too, for what I understand.
Yeah, but I mean, kickboxing is a different sport, and usually they put their weight out a bit much over the front, well, less over the front foot, because you can sweep people's legs, so they don't have the same sort of stance as boxing. And obviously they don't slip punches in the same way because you'll be slipping onto a kick. Whereas like last night he boxed like a guy who's been boxing his whole life. So I was quite impressed. He's obviously got very good muscle memory to pick that up so quickly.
You know, he's 30 years old now. You know, what next for him really? Because I think who's his promoters at Bannerman or is it Banner Promotions? I mean, I think the potential for a rematch here at some point down the line. I really don't know who to look at there for.
I mean,
his future.
He's at 140, right? So
yeah.
And he's a Brooklyn fighter. So Garcia would make sense if they could get that. I don't think Garcia will take it based on the fact that he struggled with Herrera. And there's some similarities between him and Herrera, to be honest. Paulie's probably finished, but that would be a nice little money earner in Brooklyn. Same with Judah if they want to go that route. Alternatively, they could try and just keep him in the mix and throw him in with the other top guys at 140. And the fact that he's with a neutral promoter, you could see the Rios fight happening, the Alvarado fight happening. You'd probably have to go up and wait for that. But I mean, the good thing is he's not in a promotional deadlock because he's with a neutral party. He's coming off quite a good win. And he did only draw in Brooklyn.
One fighter, actually, I just noticed Jesse Vargas has got a fight coming up against Anton Novikov in August. I mean, the winner of that fight potentially, maybe even a unification fight at some point down the line. And the Argentinian, what do you call him? I think he's quite high up in the WBO ranking, Cesar Cuna or Cecina or something like his name is. He's 47-0.
See,
2 knockouts.
He's the one who can't punch.
Yeah, he's got 2 knockouts, I think.
I'm surprised they never got him in for Khan at some stage.
I think Matchroom will probably get him in at some point because you know how they like to recycle the Argentinian fighters from time to time.
Mm-hmm.
But anyways, guys, just to let listeners know, we're going to have an interview just after the Belly of the Week segment with the former amateur fighter turned journalist and filmmaker Brin-Jonathan Butler, who specialises in the Cuban boxing scene, and he's classed as the last person to interview the former Cuban Olympic champion Teofilo Stevenson. I believe he was the last person to ever interview him before he passed away in 2012. So we'll hope to bring that interview for you in a wee bit. There's not really much action this week, lads. But we're actually getting called out, Kurt, on Twitter for our hate, shall we say, towards Miguel Cotto for his win next.
We were getting a bit of hate, I say, a bit of abuse, and I didn't really appreciate it.
Yeah. So, Tommy, I'll go to you first, mate. I mean, you're in attendance. You can let us know. But I mean, all the Cotto hoes are kind of going a bit kind of overboard with the fact that okay, the man won the lineal title, but at the same time as we didn't know how short. You know, you've got to call it. You know, you've got to call it what it is. You know, he was a short fighter.
Well, that's exactly it. People talk about hindsight, but boxing's a sport. It's about hindsight. How are you meant to know before the fight that Sergio Martinez is going to come out like that and be injured like that? It's impossible to know. So all you've really got is hindsight. All you can see is what happens in that ring, and it was clear as day in the ring that Sergio Martinez was not fit to fight. He was injured. So does Scott deserve credit for winning the title? Sure, yeah, he won it. but does it go down as a great win? Absolutely not.
I think, Tommy, you like you said, using attendance, you knew that Martinez was not what he once was. That was obvious. I mean, he's nearly 40 years old. He's had a lot of injuries, inactivity. I mean, last time he fought was against Murray, where he didn't look very good in that. But even we still believed, even if he wasn't at his best, he'd still probably have a bit too much for Cotto, who's also, not exactly the fighter he once was, but physically, what did Martinez have left? And you don't know until they're in the ring. I mean, the truth is told in the ring.
But the guys came back for two crucial ligament injuries. You know, he looked like he didn't look the same fighter against Martin Murray. He looked. I think he looked a bit decenter against Murray, but obviously he's done the same injury again. I think it was a different knee, wasn't it? Was it the same knee?
I think it was the same knee, mate, and I think it was something like two surgeries in about the space of just under 20 months or something like that.
Doing your cruciate at once is bad, but doing it in the same knee twice, you know, that's a career-ending injury, isn't it? That's all that is. And it was obvious that Sergio couldn't set himself on the leg to get the punches off. He couldn't get the snap, the punches.
The thing is, I've been called a Cuttle hater, right? Which I refute venomously, you know. But
the thing is, Kurt, but it doesn't matter what you say now, mate, because whatever you say is the person that calls you out and calls you a hater no longer respects your opinion. So you got to respond to that now.
Well, that's saddened me, that really has. And the thing is, but I said to him and I said to everyone else, you know, it's like when Pacquiao fought De La Hoya. Going into that fight, there was people who thought Oscar would destroy him, you know, literally end his career. Some people were generally fearing for Pacquiao in that fight. But hindsight, you know, when you see him in the ring, nobody expected Pacquiao to actually, you know, rape him raw like that. And you got to say afterwards, well, credit to Pacquiao for doing it because nobody expected it. But we all know Oscar was an absolute shell of himself, so how much credit can we give? I mean, there's got to be some, you know, a level that we got to stop at. You know, full, you know, credit to Pacquiao for going in there and doing it, but you know, that was not you know, an Oscar at his best, of course, and it wasn't a Sergio Martinez at his best. It was plainly obvious to see, and I don't see, you know, you can't. It seems to me like if you bring out saying that, you automatically class the hater or whatever, but I'm a fan of Pacquiao, but I'm not going to lie and pretend, you know, Antonio Margarito was at his best just because Pacquiao smashed him, or De La Hoya was at his best. You know, the truth is, they weren't.
Alistair, are we going slightly overboard, mate? Because, you know, in the day as well as if you look at past history, Larry Holmes doesn't get a lot of respect for what he did against Muhammad Ali. You've got the same issue here again with Oscar De La Hoya. Again, Tommy mentioned, you know, sports about hindsight. Same thing happened here with Pacquiao and Oscar. A lot of the Floydites seem to kind of want to shit on that win for Pacquiao. So, you know, again, in hindsight there against Martinez, is Kurt being slightly harsh on his hate towards what happened last week?
Well, yeah, and I should be the only one getting abused because everyone was harsh on him, I thought.
Yeah.
I wasn't too bad, in all honesty.
Yeah, as I said last week, Cotto is one of my favourite fighters at 140, and I really enjoyed his career up until the and including the first Margarito fight. I was pulling for him in that, and against Clottey. It was just when he started becoming a bit of a whinger after. I think he handled himself with a lot of grace and decorum when the rap scandal first came to light. Which more recently, he's been a bit of a whinger about it. Now, the whole point of analysing fights is you put them in context and you look at the situation. Stuff does get elucidated during the course of a fight that you weren't expecting going in, and it was completely clear in that fight that Martinez's knees were done, and he was well past it. So no, I'm not. I don't put much stock in that win because it was pretty clear from the first opening 30 seconds that Martinez just wasn't the same fighter that he was or has been in his prime. And not only that, but this is the second title grab that Cotto's made, where he's had a one-legged guy in front of him, and he's actually he's got a good left hook. He's got a guy who's open to the left hook who can't move, and he failed to lay him out. Actually, the guy carried him for 10 rounds, and then his corner stopped it, which is exactly the same as what happened against Yuri Foreman. He had a one-legged guy in there and couldn't actually legitimately stop him, or it had to come down to a corner stoppage, which I think is a bit disappointing. I would have expected a guy like Cotto to go in and just, he should have stopped Martinez within 2 or 3 rounds in the state he was in, and Yuri Foreman should have been stopped as soon as the knee injury went. He shouldn't have let him off the hook. I just don't think it's a particularly good indictment for Cotto, really. And that's not being a hater, that's just, taking an honest evaluation of the fight.
And the thing is, how can you be called a hater when Cotto's own trainer said the man shot? He said himself that Chavez never trained, yet he still nearly beat him because Martinez is done, and the Murray fight proved it, and he shot. That's Roach saying that. That's not the hater saying it. That's the guy saying it. So, I mean, I don't understand what we can say. I mean, let's pretend that was the best version of Martinez. Cotto's just gone in there and absolutely destroyed the lineal middleweight, the best middleweight in the world. He's absolutely destroyed him without breaking sweat. How many people will pick him to beat Golovkin or Canelo? You know, that I asked it on Twitter and no one seemed to answer because, you know, if you destroy the best middleweight in the world like that, surely you're going to be a favourite against the Canelo or Golovkin. I don't think many people will put him as a favourite against either guy.
See, the thing is, well, you know, what Alistair says there is totally bang on. You've got 2 vacant title wins, and you've got 2 title wins against 2 cripples. Okay, now the Cotto hoes need to get a grasp of reality here, right? 2 years ago, who called Cotto out? Sergio Martinez. Sergio Martinez called him out. What was Cotto's response? What does he bring to the table? Well, he brings the lineal middleweight title. But what Cotto was getting at was there was not enough money on the table, right? Okay, fast forward 2 years. You've got a guy 2 years older, still can't draw flies to shit in America. So what else changed? That's right, the guy got old. They knew he was shot and over the hill and he had a bad knee. Two operations. I said that the week before the fight, the only reason he took the fight is because Martinez was a cripple. Right or wrong, I'm fucking right. Tommy, mate, you want to pile in?
That's what can be said. I'm going to add into it as well. Actually, Antonio Margarito had one eye when he fought him, so that's 2 guys with 1 leg and 1 guy with 1 eye.
All he needs to face is 1 guy with 1 arm now, and he's got the mix.
He should feel Paul Williams at the wheelchair next.
Aye, or Douglas Barder, maybe. Well, listen, just while we're talking about Cotton, we'll go into the only Twitter question that I got from Ben O'Connor. He says, does Andrade outbox Cotto at 154? I think he's seriously dynamic, Andrade. That's what he's claiming.
Well, look at the trouble Cotto had with Trout.
Yeah,
a big guy at the weight who can, you know, box well. I mean, this what I'm saying. I mean, it's not hating on Cotto. You know, Cotto went in there and did the job. Yeah, fair enough. But look at him against Trout, because Trout wasn't, you know, a guy who was well past it. And Trout has gone on to show that, you know, he's a decent boxer, but not great. I mean, look how Lara beat him up. You know what I'm saying? So I'm just saying, Cotto, to me, this is why I thought Martinez win, because Cotto shouldn't even been at junior middleweight, never mind middleweight. He should be at welterweight if he can still make it. Because, you know, at welterweight, he seemed to face guys, you know, who, you know, he could paper over the cracks that he should be there. And when he faced someone, you know, at his best, like Trout, he looked horrible in that fight. So for me, that was why I thought Martinez would do it. But, like I said, I mean, Andrade, I think would be a bad fight for him, but we're called, you know, Cotto haters, but if he beat a Canelo or a Golovkin, we'd have to give him nothing but full credit because he deserve it.
Does anybody really seriously believe he is going to give Golovkin a chance to fight for the middleweight title? Not a chance, you know. I've got more chance of, I don't know, I didn't want to be rude because my missus is sitting right next to me. She's like literally 2 feet away from me here. So
Give me daggers.
I better not get too crude, you know, but at the end of the day, he is not going to fight that Golovkin. Seriously, I mean, I can honestly see maybe a Mayweather rematch happening at 155, maybe.
Just on the Golovkin, you know, Cotto fight, which we can't see happening. I hope, you know, Golovkin really puts on a show against Gil, you know, beats him up, knocks him out, and I hope he calls Cotto out in the post-fight press. You know, I don't want to see him, or, you know, saying, I'll leave it to the promoter, or I'll fight with anyone. I want him to actually call Cotto out and put, you know, a bit of pressure on, because HBO will want to make that fight, but it still won't get him the fight, but I'd just like to see him put a bit of pressure on.
Call him out in the garden, eh?
If he's not going to fight Martinez like as of 2 years ago, right? That version of Martinez that took Chavez to school, right? There's no way in the month of Sundays he's going to fight a prime Golovkin with heavy hands.
The thing is, Bob Arum's already said that he's going to be coming back, I think, December the 6th or the 13th. It's not going to be against Canelo, because Canelo's still got another fight, Showtime pay-per-view. But I don't know if it was Doug Fisher or Steve Kim, but they actually said that there were rumours that it was going to be Korobov in December. That's what they said.
Oh dear, that's a bad fight for Cotto. That is a very bad fight for him.
And he's gonna, you know, they're saying, you know, it'll probably be Canelo next year. You know, while Canelo, you know, fights out his last fight on Showtime pay-per-view, but if you think Korobov, that's not an easy fight for someone who's really not a middleweight. No matter what you just saw him against Martinez, I still don't think he should be at the weight.
He should be at 147. Just they can't be asked getting still trained into the weight. Anyway, guys, just before we do, I don't think I've got any other Twitter questions coming this week, but we'll just go on to our Value of the Week segment, and Kurt will just play the intro music for us.
Let's be totally and brutally honest here. Sean Corbin makes Valery Brudov look like Ivan Drago. It's as simple as that. He's beat what's in front of him tonight. He faces me. He's going to visit mental demons again. And let's get something straight. Come to me, mate. You come to me. Next time, ain't no judges going to be needed. I'm going to do worse than Kovalev. I am going to do worse than Kovalev.
On Saturday night, mate, you better hold it together. I'm going to smash it and nail you to pieces, mate. I'm going to hit him. When he gets in the ring and we get 10-ounce gloves on, I'm going to smash his head to bits. I'm going to do it November the 30th against all odds. No matter what people say, the journalists write what you want. All as I'll say is tune back in and then look at me on December the 1st when I am world champion. It's as simple as that.
I'm willing to die in that ring. It's as simple as that. I am willing to die. I'm willing to die, Saturday. Is he?
You fucking rat!
Hey guys, I've not really got a lot this week actually. I mean, I'm kind of relying on a few guys on Twitter hitting us up each week, but I was listening to Steve Bunce's podcast on Monday, and I don't know if anybody heard it, but he says Buncey was calling basically for Cotto to unify the middleweight division. He says he could potentially also beat Golovkin.
No chance.
So he's definitely in there. He's definitely well up for nomination. Who else did we have? I had someone else
We've
here.
got the man himself. The man who
did Bellew. He mentioned about Nathan Cleverly again. Says he'll never box again after fighting me. I don't want to ever see him fight again. Well, if you can't do it at light heavyweight, what chance are you going to have? Maybe. Well, Kurt, you think he's going to knock him out?
It's one of those ones where I'd like to see Cleverly fight someone decent at the cruiserweight, and we're not going to get to see that because he's fighting a guy who's, frankly, it's a laughable opponent, and so it's going to be a tough one. I mean, I could see Cleverly winning on points, but I could see Bellew stopping him as well. But I think it's a tough one, to be honest.
Go and wash your mouth out with soap, Kurt.
But I hope Cleverly wins.
I don't know if Chris Blackman wanted me to put this one forward, but I think he was mentioning Spencer Fearon saying he's completely writing off Lara's chance against Canelo. Did anybody hear that, or does that deserve a nomination this week?
I didn't hear that.
Another
one from Bellew. I mean, this is unusual from Bellew. He doesn't usually say things like this, but he said maybe he should stop being. I can't say it word for word, but he says something like, maybe I should stop doing what I'm doing and do what other guys doing and going for easier title shots and stop going after the best guys in the division because it doesn't pay him to do that. This is a guy who fought Cleverly for the title and said the WBO was a shit title, so.
I mean, he's going to be hard to beat this week. Who's this guy, Dewar? Is this the guy you should do all these predictions? Is that the black guy?
Dwyer.
Is that who
yeah,
I'm thinking
Dwyer,
about?
yeah.
He's basically saying he said Cotto would beat and Cotto would beat Froch at 168, and with Cotto beating Froch, that would make him the dominant force between 140 and 168.
I think we have a winner.
He's got to be trolling.
That can't be a legitimate prediction.
Well, he's been quite off his predictions in the past, as you know. I've only watched one of his videos for a while. I think the last one I watched was probably Groves against the Gill.
The one that he did get right was he predicted Tony Thompson in the first fight with Price to knock him out early. That's the one that I did know that he got right. But when you're making like hundreds of videos, you're gonna get one right, ain't you?
Yeah.
True that.
You guys got any nominations?
No. Give it to Dwyer.
It's kind of bare this week, so I don't know if you want to vacate the title this week. Since it's kind of bare.
Yeah, I'm just trying to think of anything else I've seen.
Cotto and Froch, man. Imagine they two fought. Fucking hell. I told
Froch would kill him, eh?
Of course he would, but you'd be hoping for a double knockout, eh?
To be honest, I thought Abraham would absolutely kill Cotto, innit?
Yep.
I don't know. I really don't know. I think Cotto would beat him. I actually think he would beat him.
Beat Arthur Abraham, really?
Got to be too powerful, eh?
He's got to be too big and strong. It's just thing, and he's not like Cotto's hard to hit.
I know. I think what I could probably see Cotto taking on the cards, but I could also see him gassing around about the 8th, 9th, 10th round, and maybe Abraham getting lucky like he did against Taylor with the right hand.
I think Abraham would send Cotto's face out the back of Cotto's head.
That sounds marvellous. Sorry,
there's too much hate on this pod. I'm leaving.
The Cotto hoes will not be happy with this. We better move on. So anyway, guys, who we got? D-War, Tony Bellew, and who was the other one? Steve Bunce. That's only 3 this week. I really think it's kind of a very, very weak segment this week.
It's a bit of a WBA interim segment this week.
Yeah, let's just leave it this week.
Should we just vacate the title this week, lads?
I don't want to give the award to someone who's not that deserving.
Yeah, I agree with that. It's a very, very legitimate award. I don't think we should just be handing out willy-nilly for like week. I mean, we could be classed like the WBO, for instance, handing out these weak titles and that to guys with ranking systems that's pretty poor. We're
not the alphabets. We this is a legitimate title to us.
Yeah. I mean, we put a lot of thought and a lot of time and dedication into this, and we've got our listeners trying to pull in all the information for us. I mean, they don't want to be letting our listeners down by handing out bogus titles to champions, etc.
I think we should give Donny the Bellew of the week.
What, for not turning up?
For not turning up.
Fucking prick. Donny Baseball, if you're listening, mate, or you're going to be listening back to this, you better get your arse on this pod, and you're due us an explanation as to where you've been hiding. And being up your missus' love tunnel is not going to cut it for me, mate, so you better get your arse fucking back here and let us know what's going on.
I mean, Donny doing this is worse than when Gamboa just failed to turn up against Brandon Rios. I mean, he's just promised us, and he has just gone running. It's a disgrace.
Big Dave's more reliable than Donny these days.
Aye. Xanax Dave.
Even Matty was on a few weeks back.
I know. Matty's actually made more appearances in the pod in the last 6 weeks than Donny's made. That's actually quite frightening. I think he's getting pussy whipped, or he's under a thumb or something anyway.
I just think these Americans are just intimidated by our knowledge and our beautiful accents, to be honest.
Either that, mate, or I think it's because we've not got any oil to plunder, so that's where the Yanks are all kind of like, basically retreating. They don't want to invade us because no oil, no mineral wealth or anything like that, But anyways, the Bellew of the Week award is... I was just going to say, the Bellew of the Week award has been vacated this week. There's no worthy winner. But anyway, I'd like to thank the guys for sending us in some of the comments, but we need to try and get a wee bit more better comments than that, unfortunately. So it's going to be a vacant title this week. Coming up next is a really interesting interview that Kurt and I did with Brin-Jonathan Butler, who is from New York. Now, Brin is actually a ex-amateur boxer turned journalist and documentary filmmaker. He's got a book out just now on Guillermo Rigondeaux, and he's got a documentary which is getting shown at the Toronto Film Festival. It's called Split Decision, and it kind of covers the economic issues in Cuba, etc., and as to why fighters would want to stay in Cuba and why those, the risks that they take in order to try and get to America to try and live the dream. So it runs for just over an hour, but it's a very, very interesting interview. So here it is, lads. Box Asylum listeners, we're with Brin-Jonathan Butler today, a former amateur boxer, freelance journalist and documentary filmmaker who's had his work published by the classical sports website and Saloon.com, focusing on US political and current affairs, and is currently working on a documentary called Split Decision, following the Guillermo Rigondeaux's defection from Cuba, and it also follows the current situation of American and Cuban relations on the economic situation since Fidel Castro came to power in 1959. Now, this also goes through the eyes of some of the greatest Cuban fighters. And Brin, some people don't know this, but you've actually trained in some of the boxing gyms in Cuba, and you were worked under the tutelage of a 2-time world and Olympic gold medalist. How did that come about?
It's just the nature of, I think, communism in Cuba is that doctors, lawyers, any profession, you're not going to be making more than $20 a month, including some of these former Olympic champions who are relegated to training kids or working with the national team in some capacity. And I found out that Hector Venant, who won a gold medal in the 92 and 96 games, was available. And I wasn't sure what kind of price he wanted under the table in order to train. And it worked out that he just asked for $6 a day, which was about 2 weeks' salary. So yeah, it was very surreal.
That's unbelievable. I mean, I think Hector was actually a part of the squad that I think it was about 8 gold medals they won in 1992 in Barcelona.
Yeah, I mean, I think that was the highlight of, since the revolution. I think that was the best team that they ever put forward, was that 92 team. They were just incredible.
It's unbelievable. I mean, I remember reading something about the government, if you were on, if you were with the Olympic squad, you got a government subsidised lifestyle, how much is it, a government subsidised lifestyle? Is it a house you get? Is it a car? Do they get so much money per month?
Well, I think it depends on who you are. I mean, if you think about the most famous Cuban, really after Fidel, I think it would be a boxer with Teofilo Stevenson, and he was given the house that was actually next door to Che Guevara's widow. So it was a pretty decent house by Cuban standards, but it was hardly the mansion that I had heard it was. In the Miami Herald, you hear that the reason why all the fighters stay is that they're given this, they're living like kings. That's just entirely not true. I would say they live better than the average Cuban. There's no question of that. But after that house that he was given next door to Che's widow and the widow's children, he was moved to a nicer neighborhood called Nautico, where he had the only pool in that neighborhood. But again, it was a 3-bedroom house, and living in luxury by Cuban standards meant that he was allowed to live in that house with just his own family rather than extended family, which is sort of more the typical lifestyle of average Cubans.
Yeah, I mean, I think Stevenson had something like 302 amateur wins with, I think it was just 11 years without a loss. What was, I think you were the last person to interview Teofilo Stevenson before he died. Am I right in saying that?
Yes.
What reason did he actually give you for staying in Cuba? Obviously, I mean, I think he was offered $5 million to fight Muhammad Ali around about 1977, I believe.
Yeah, that's correct.
Was he true to the cause of communism or the socialist state in Cuba?
I mean, I think that's complicated in the sense of, yes, I do believe that. I mean, in his words, I think he put it very eloquently when I interviewed him, that there are certain decisions that we all have to make with our hearts and our souls that we can never betray. And he said, I lived with the decision that I made, and I'll die with that decision. And he did. But at the same time, he was only willing to sit down with me on camera to talk about all the money he turned down, provided I pay him $130 under the table, because he was so destitute at that time in his life. So, reconciling those two seeming contradictions, I think, is what makes Cuba so interesting.
Yeah,
and that was the same way when I interviewed Felix Sabon. Sabon probably turned down a $100 million career, something like Lennox Lewis's career, and he, on camera, just endlessly spoke about how money was meaningless. And of course, it's very true that he turned down all that money. But again, he wouldn't talk unless I would pay him $100 to sit down with him, and he certainly wasn't giving that money over to the government.
Yeah, I mean, were you convinced with Teofilo's comments, about what's $1 million compared to the love of 8 million Cubans? Were you convinced of that saying?
Well, I don't know what he would have to do to demonstrate. I don't know what he's done to contradict it. He had every opportunity to leave. There are many other athletes who were in a position to turn down, a lot more money was on the table for them to leave, and even if they did, like the Cuban baseball player Orlando El Duque Hernandez, even when he won the World Series with the Yankees after defecting, he said, I never would have left. I had every opportunity, because he left at about 33 years of age. He never left in his prime. 99% of all the athletes don't leave. And really the ones who do have only left because they're past their prime in Cuba. So I don't see any evidence that Stevenson didn't believe what he said, and I didn't see that he was brainwashed by it either. I just think he was somebody who saw the way his parents lived pre-Fidel Castro and really believed that he'd been given a better life and that his daughter would have a better life than he had. Didn't mean that it was a decision he was perfectly content with. I think he would have loved to have had the opportunity to turn professional in many, as a competitor. But I don't see in any way that he was the hypocrite he's been made out to be from a lot of his adversaries, or Fidel's adversaries, I should say, in Miami and Florida.
I think it was, as I said, I think it was about 1977 was when the Ali fight was possibly mooted, or when the offer was made to Stevenson for that fight. I know Ali was coming off that brutal war against Joe Frazier, which many people believe was probably the end of his career. I think he fought 6 times up until that offer. Reading some of your comments, on a potential fight, I think you were kind of the side as, Ali hadn't faced someone, like Stevenson, very fleet-footed, very, very strong right hand. But do you believe that maybe Stevenson could go the 15 rounds with someone so experienced as Ali if that fight were ever to happen? I know it's a very speculative question, but do you think he might have blasted the distance?
Well, I think that's the main reason I really wanted to explore that question, and just how Cuban boxers in general would have done with that whole kind of continuum of all the great fighters, because I think when Guillermo Rigondeaux against Donaire stepped into the glare of Radio City Music Hall, I think he was kind of fighting on behalf of the legacy of all Cuban fighters, and he just annihilated the 2012 ESPN Fighter of the Year and made him look like a rank amateur. And all the same criticisms that are levied against Stevenson's chances against Ali were identical to what Guillermo had to endure. And my sense of it was also that Guillermo could have done the exact same performance he did probably 12 years before, after the first gold medal that he won. And there's so many criticisms that the Cubans are racking up these medals when they're grown men fighting kids, but all the great Cuban fighters won their first medal, 19, 20 years old. They were dominant throughout their entire careers as amateurs. So I just don't see any impediment to Stevenson. I mean, I interviewed George Foreman at his house. He has a mansion just inside Houston, and his words and his account of Stevenson was that he was the dominant heavyweight of that era. He saw him as being, had he left, that he was the class of that division. And that's quite a confession for somebody, who was as dominant as Foreman was, and the people that he faced and who he just obliterated. So I think Stevenson, especially at that time, given how Ali was quite vulnerable at that time, I mean, he was just about to lose to Leon Spinks in their first fight. Stevenson was a modern heavyweight in his size. I mean, he was Lennox Lewis sized, and he wasn't using weights or anything. So I think that'd be a very difficult fight for Ali at that time.
Plus, you've got Stevenson, 24 years old, I believe, at that time, so potentially at the peak of his powers.
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, Stevenson was such a menacing heavyweight at that time. Not to say that the fighters he was beating went on to have brilliant sterling careers, but I just think the tools that he had at that time, I think he'd have a chance against any heavyweight. So skilled, so composed, and that right hand is one of the great right hands in heavyweight history, in my opinion.
Yeah. I mean, obviously, one fighter we're going to get back to will be Guillermo Rigondeaux, but I just want to ask some questions about one fighter that I don't really know too much about. I mean, some of the fights I watch have been on YouTube or been able to get from other sources. Felix Savon, I mean, obviously, great pedigree. I think he had 3 gold medals, but I think he, politics, stripped him of winning a 4th gold medal, I believe, because I think he was 34 years old and he wasn't allowed to fight for another gold medal. Was that correct?
Yeah, you're not allowed to fight beyond that age. So he retired after the 2000 medal.
What's he up to nowadays? I mean, obviously you had a chance to speak to him. What's he doing with his life now? Because obviously we haven't heard any much about what's happening with the former greats in Cuba.
Well, his nephew has gone on to become a very dominant heavyweight fighter. I think he was robbed when he was at the London Olympics.
Against Anthony Joshua. I felt Joshua lost that fight, obviously.
Yeah, I don't think he's in Felix's class as a fighter, But I mean, as you say, Felix in his prime, I mean, Felix from 86, I think, was when he won his first amateur championship or junior amateur world championship, all the way to 2000. You could make a pretty strong argument. It's the best amateur record in history in terms of who, I mean, he just trounced guys who went on to have really fruitful professional careers. He knocked out David Tua in, I think, a minute. Several other guys who went on to become very legitimate contenders. Sabone just walked through, just annihilated Shannon Briggs, for example. So where Sabone is at now is he was probably, of all the Cuban fighters that I interviewed, he seemed the most content. Maybe he's the most content boxer I've ever met, in the United States or Europe or Cuba, for that matter. He has a house that is kind of like any suburban home you might find. A few bedrooms. He has a little trophy room, some stereo equipment from the 1970s, and his view was that he was living like a king, that he never dreamed that he would have such material wealth. And as I say, it was kind of the lifestyle that anybody in a lower middle class station of life would expect to enjoy. So I think he seemed very, very content, far more content than Stevenson was with his choices. And he was also pretty adamant that had he left to fight Mike Tyson, that he would have annihilated Tyson and anybody else who was there. And he just said, look at my record if you don't think so.
Is it true that the offer for Mike Tyson was also $5 million for Stevenson? Or was it Stevenson that was offered that money to fight Tyson, or was it Savon?
Stevenson was offered $5 million. King and Arum both offered him $5 million. With Sabone, I've heard estimates between $15 and $25 million for him to have fought Tyson. And Sabone's reply that I thought was funny was that the same promoters who actually came to Cuba to his house to try and lure him away, after Sabone just flatly rejected them, they spoke to his wife, and his wife's response was, "You'll have an easier chance getting Fidel to leave Havana than you will my husband." It was an incredible encounter. I was laughing through the whole thing with his responses, because they just seem insane, and yet it's quite interesting that you think it's insane that somebody would just be content to not be a millionaire and live adequately. But he didn't live beyond that.
What about, I think we watched Erislandy Savon through the World Amateur Championships and the Olympics. Although I've not really seen too much of him, the only time I can really get a chance to see him is when he fights with the World Series of Boxing for the Cuban team. Do you know if that's been well received over in Cuba? I mean, obviously, I think the Americans fought for the first time in Cuba there, for the first time in something like 26, 30 years or something like that, I think it was.
Yeah.
Was it? Do you know if it's been well received over there, the World Series of Boxing? Because it's semi-professional boxing, so they'll be getting paid for it. I mean, is that well received by the state, etc.?
Well, the state is in a transition with sort of all walks of life in Cuba. So yeah, they're starting to take some necessary measures with the athletes, I think, to mitigate just this pipeline of Cubans who are defecting, both in baseball and boxing, because certainly, especially since about 2006, there's been more athletes than in history, in the sense of since the Cuban Revolution began, defecting. And there's a much more efficient pipeline of athletes leaving now that the smugglers' boats have entered the fray, rather than just jumping on rafts or defecting when they're fighting internationally. This smuggling boat operation is just so efficient and much safer in the sense of transporting the athletes over, but the government is trying to find a way just to resolve this really sad issue that foreign agents are going over to Cuba all the time to try and lure these people off, bribe their families, bribe their friends, to do anything to get them over, and then these athletes, of course, are beholden to those same parties once they arrive, and it's quite a dangerous passage also for them.
Yeah. You know, well, just as I said again, we're going to get to Guillermo, but a couple of fighters, for instance, just before we get on to that, I was wanting to ask you about was Odlanier Solis. Are you disappointed as to how his professional career has panned out, considering how good an amateur he was?
Oh, absolutely. I mean,
what's been his problem, really? You know, is it just been like the lack of dedication, or is it just, you know, he's got to the American way of life now and he's more happy with it, more secure, so to speak?
Well, yeah. I mean, certainly when you look at how he fought against David Haye, I mean, this is a guy who was 200 pounds, and now when he's coming in after, 2 months of training, he's around 250. That's a problem. And he actually, when he was fighting against Felix Sabon in national competitions, beat him 2 out of 3 times, and still was overlooked for the 2000 Olympics on the basis of it was more of a political necessity for Sabon to have an opportunity to compete to win his 3rd medal, and match Stevenson and Laszlo Pop as the only men to ever do it. But Solis was overlooked and then had to win his medal in 2004. But I just don't think most of the Cubans who've come over have never been the fighters that they were in Cuba and fighting internationally once they've turned pro. I just think you have to understand that transition. Some of these Cuban athletes literally have walked into a supermarket and fainted at the sight of how much selection is available to them, given where they've come from. So when you think about people who've never had a bank account entering, I think one of the rawest forms of capitalism that is available in our society, which is pro boxing, where these guys have no protection anywhere from anything. And trying to make their way outside of the ring, I just think is a minefield that they're walking completely blind. And most of the time they're doing it without the aid of their family or friends or really anybody that they can trust. So I think that's where Solis sort of fell victim to, just trying to acclimate to his new life and never being able to go back to his old life. It took a major toll on his boxing career, and the guy was just a brilliant prospect. So it's really disappointing to see how that unfolded, but you're seeing it with many of the other Cubans as well. I think Gamboa's career is a massive disappointment.
Yeah, I was going to ask about like Gamboa and Lara, for instance. What were your thoughts on their progress so far, and Richard Abril obviously as well?
Well, I think Gamboa, I haven't really seen as much excitement as he could generate sort of since Tyson's rise. Gamboa was just, I think, the fastest hands in boxing for the last several years. I'm not sure where he's at now. We'll see when he fights Crawford in July. But I just think he had that manner about him, where I've been to many fights here in New York, covering fights for several years, and I've just never seen a crowd as electrified by his determination to make a statement with his knockouts, and just his utter contempt for his opponents was just exhilarating to watch. Now, the flip side of that is I think he's not the most approachable person. I think he's run into problems, obviously, with domestic abuse. There's now a lot of indications that he was tied into a steroid ring in South Florida. So clearly not the most stable person. And his career has stalled dramatically after the fiasco with Brandon Rios, which could have been not just an opportunity for him to really, I think, enter the big time in boxing, had he knocked out Rios or done something dramatic. But he would have earned far more money than he's ever earned as a professional as well. I believe he was to earn in the neighborhood of, I think, $1 million or $1.3 million, which for a fighter, still in the infancy of his career, I mean, that's extraordinary. And not only did he not make it and not have the fight and not have an opportunity to make the statement that I think his fans were expecting, but just destroyed his career politically by arranging 2 massive press conferences in Los Angeles and Florida and then just not showing up. Bob Arum said he'd never had a fighter in his entire career as a promoter do such a thing. So just a lot of self-destructiveness.
Do you think it's been a bad move from Gamboa to side up with 50 Cent, Curtis Jackson?
Yes, I do. I don't see any indication that 50 Cent has a clue what he's doing as a promoter. And I think a real weakness, I mean, in boxers in general, but certainly with Cuban boxers, is I think the tendency to be offered $1,000 up front and take it against making $1 million next week or next month. So, because these people come from such scarcity, I think they make a lot of terrible decisions, and in many cases they don't think they're accountable for those decisions. They're signing contracts with multiple promoters who come over to Cuba, and then, they think there's nothing wrong with that, or that legally one contract they don't like won't be upheld for some reason, because they just have no experience in it in Cuba, where literally their entire life is supervised and looked after by the state. So once they're free to be individuals, they have no clue what they're doing, and they have no clue of the implications of doing things like signing over, power of attorney or any of these kind of things. So I think Gamboa making that decision to leave Arum to go over to 50 Cent, politically, what kind of traction has 50 Cent demonstrated in professional boxing? I don't really see any indication that he's making progress in any way. And who knows? I guess we'll have a better idea where Gamboa stands in terms of his future prospects after this fight against Crawford. But I don't feel good about it, and I kind of see him having been on the downward slide for quite a while, both as a fighter and also just his reputation really couldn't be worse in the sport.
Yeah, it's more like I think he's 30, 31 now. I think it's more like a point of either what could have been or it's now make or break, I think, in all honesty. Brent, I'm going to hand you over to my colleague Kurt Warder, who I believe has got a couple of questions for you also. Kurt?
Yeah, hi, Brin.
Hi.
Well, I want to ask you about a guy who we've seen quite a lot of, being over here, like in Britain, and that's Mike Perez. He got he finally got his big chance on HBO, and obviously, it was a great fight, but sadly ended in tragedy with Abdislamov being, seriously injured. And then in his next fight after that, he didn't look too good, and now he's got another big fight against Bryant Jennings, where I think the winner of that is going to be fighting the Stavern Wilder winner. So, I mean, how do you see his career panning out? Because he's one who we've always been impressed with, as he's come up.
I think Mike Perez is a very impressive heavyweight, a very un-Cuban style also, vicious puncher. He's very impressive to me. I think he had, maybe he still has, I should say, all the potential in the world, I think, to probably move into a dominant position with the heavyweights if the Klitschko's step down. I know Vitaly's already left, but Vladimir might be soon to follow. And Mike Perez is a very dangerous proposition, I think, for any heavyweight, simply because he fights to win. He is a devastating puncher. He's a very active heavyweight. And unlike a lot of the Cubans, he started a new family in Cork. He married an Irish woman, has 2 or 3 kids, I believe. So I think he has that stable family life that a lot of them lack. And he seems to enjoy fighting. I agree his last performance wasn't great, but I think he's a very promising fighter, and I was at his fight here in New York, and aside from the devastating consequences of that fight, I thought he put on an extraordinary performance, and had he had one to follow it, unlike what he did, I think he'd be in a great position to get a fight with one of the Klitschkos.
Another fight who's going to have a Cuban who's going to have a massive fight coming up is Erislandy Lara against Saul Canelo Alvarez. I mean, how do you see that fight going?
I think that's really in Lara's hands to win that fight or to make a statement with that fight. I saw Lara fight against Angulo, where it was a very exciting fight. He was dropped twice. I believe it was the first time he'd ever been knocked down as a as a professional fighter. Canelo's a big step, lots of exposure, massive fan base. So, I mean, if Lara can turn it on and outclass him, let's say, with a knockout, which I don't believe Canelo's ever been knocked down before, boy, it puts Lara into some interesting contention for a massive fight. I mean, would Mayweather step up for that? I'm not sure, but it's a very interesting, dangerous fight for Canelo. Now, then again, I think Lara has, when he's sort of taken his foot off the gas, been rightly criticized as willing to sort of coast to victory in that Cuban style that just seems so anathema to your average fight fan. So I think it's a fascinating fight. I would favor him against Canelo personally, but most of the writers I've spoken to don't. So maybe I'm just biased in the favor of Cuban fighters.
I think it's going to be tough for him to get a decision. I think that's the way they're looking at it as well, because Canelo, he's, because of the fan base. Well, I mean, if you think of the Mayweather fight, one of the judges gave him a draw in that fight. And, I personally thought Austin Trout did a lot better against Canelo, but he wasn't given much credit at all. And I think that's why Lara should be considered, a big chance of winning this fight, because his performance against Trout was really impressive, because going in, that was looked upon as a bit as a 50-50 fight, and he just dominated Trout.
Absolutely. And his performance against Paul Williams was one of the biggest travesties I've ever seen scored. I was at that fight. It was unbelievable. I mean, I think every boxing writer I saw jumped up to scream at the referee, or rather the officials who judged it. I was amazed by that performance. That was the first time I'd seen him fight live, and to dominate a fighter as skilled as Paul Williams, and I think I scored it 11-1, maybe 10-2, and as you say, against Trout, the guy is just oozing class. It's just whether he wants it, whether he, the conditions are right for him to put forward his best performance and he can rise to the occasion. But boy, the opportunity is there for him to make a statement. I mean, what if he, to knock out Canelo after Mayweather's performance? I think that would really impress people on the pound for pound list and that kind of thing, just to get the attention of writers who are so dismissive of him. But you rightly point out the judges have been appalling toward him, so we'll have to see.
Brin, do you know the reason why Richard Abreu has been very, very inactive? He hasn't fought much over the last couple of years. Is there an injury problem there or anything? Do you know?
Why that was why Guillermo has not fought in recently?
Abreu, Richard Abreu.
Oh, Abreu. I just think the issue with all the Cuban fighters is they're dangerous. They're going to make their opponents look bad, and they don't bring in any fan base. Where is the ideal location for a Cuban to fight? There just isn't one. They can't pull an audience in Florida. They can't pull an audience. There's no Cuban American demographic that will pay to see them. The predominant locations where Cubans in the United States live are, New Jersey, South Florida. In Los Angeles, they can't pull anybody. So it's very unlike Puerto Ricans with New York or Mexicans in California. Cubans, just from a promotional standpoint, are a nightmare. I mean, even the world champions, they just draw flies. They set records for, like Rigondeaux fought in Atlantic City, and it pulled in the worst ratings that HBO After Dark had seen in 17 years. These are not the kind of records that you want to establish as a world champion, but it's happening with a lot of frequency. So I think all their careers really suffer from just that they excel as fighters in such a way that makes their opponents look bad, and they're expensive to put on in some cases, Gamboa or Rigondeaux, several others. So that's just a really, really bad formula in terms of dollars and cents from a promotional standpoint.
It is quite weird that he can't draw much in Miami, for instance, because I believe there is a big Cuban base there. I mean, I remember reading about Alexis Arguello, even though he's not Cuban, he's Nicaraguan. I believe he had quite a fair support from the Cubans when he was exiled by the Sandinista government, when he was forced to relocate to America after his houses and that were seized when they came to power.
Yeah.
It's quite weird. Brin, obviously you've worked in the gyms over there. Obviously when Castro took power back in '59, beforehand Cuba, I don't think actually won a medal in the Olympics. And then when Castro came to power, I think they kind of brought in some sort of Eastern European Soviet type training. For instance, I don't know if you can maybe educate us a wee bit more on their training techniques over there.
Well, yeah, you're absolutely right. I think their mastermind trainer, Alcides Segarra, came in and brought in a professor and coaches from East Germany and also the Soviet Union, and implemented the best of those training methods as he saw it. And from there, he ran the Cuban program for the next 40 years, and just racked up in that time more medals and world championships than many of the other countries combined, many of the other major countries combined. So, I mean, I think the emphasis over there is what makes them so unpopular as professionals. They're just so slick. Their defense is impeccable. On the most basic level, when I went over there to train and sort of asked, what makes you guys so good? They said, well, the most transferable skill you can have as a boxer is being able to dance. Who dances better than we do? Who's invented more forms of dance than we have? And we're this little impoverished third world country. And it's true. They just you see babies over there who can dance better than most adults can in the United States. And it translates into boxing. Their footwork is impeccable. I think most fans have a tendency to watch from the waist up when they're watching boxing, but if you watch from the waist down, how Cubans in the Olympics are just leagues above their competition, and of course they're found so young. If you're a talented athlete in any back alley in Cuba, you can bet that you'll be found by the time you're 8 or 9 years old, and you're going to get the best education that you could possibly have as a fighter, and be reared all the way up until you're entering into the national championships and junior world championships and then world championships and then the Olympics. So I just think there's such an emphasis on the science of fighting over there, and then just the discipline of the athletes, and for many of them it's their only way out of really destitute circumstances. You can really have a better life as an elite Cuban athlete. So I think they take it very seriously because there just isn't an alternative over there.
I remember just when you mentioned, for instance, they pick up the children about 8, 9 years old and stuff. I remember watching the documentary called the Boys That Fought for Cuba. I remember watching that, and I was taken aback as to how basic some of the equipment was. They had tires for punching bags. I remember one young boy. I think they were that. He had to maintain his weight. I mean, I was talking about 8 or 9 year old boy here, and they put him under a set of wooden stairs in order to try and make him sweat just to get that few extra ounces off. And one thing I never even thought about is when they shave their hair so much into the skull is because the hair collects oil, and that can add extra bit of ounces of weight. I just I was like, I just couldn't believe as to the lengths that were going to make these young kids make weight.
Yeah.
It was
no, there's just nothing spared. It's just total focus. Now, a lot of people look at it and they say this looks like child abuse, but I think if you looked at the training regimen of gymnasts in China or gymnasts in the United States for that matter, or any country where they're producing the athletic equivalent of a Mozart, what was necessary to produce that are totally extreme circumstances. And certainly in Cuba, the kids I was seeing who were 8, 9, 10 years old looked like 15, 16-year-old amateurs here in New York, going to Gleason's gym, just in terms of the technique and how composed they were, given how much experience they'd had training and sparring. It's just such an intense life that they lead, and some of the ones who are found to be the real prospects, the pressure that they're under is extraordinary.
Yeah. Going on to one fighter who I believe you've struck up a good relationship with over the years, you know, 2-time gold medalist. You know, there was great hype and, you know, curiosity surrounding him when he made his pro debut. Guillermo Rigondeaux. I mean, I believe you've just released a book recently called Cuban Boxer's Journey. Guillermo Rigondeaux from Castro's traitor to American champion. It just came out recently, I believe. You just let our listeners know as to where they can purchase your book, and will it be available in the UK?
It absolutely is available in the UK. On Amazon's UK equivalent, I believe it's amazon.co.uk. It's available, and I would believe at book retailers anywhere in the UK you could order it. It's exclusively an ebook, so you're going to have to find it online. But any retailer that you go visit, you'd probably be able to find it.
I've noticed it on Amazon just now. Actually, it's actually only available in the UK at the minute on Kindle edition, by the looks of it. So it's not in paperback or hardback yet. So we'll need to try and keep a wee eye on that. I mean.
Yeah, that's right. It's just an ebook. I mean, the other thing is you can download an app for your phone, and which is free from Kindle, and you can read it on your phone as well. I mean, it's not a paperback. I wish this one was, but that's where it's at.
I'll certainly keep an eye on it anyway. Obviously, one of the things I've been really looking forward to, and I remember speaking to, I don't know if you know him, Paddy Cronin. He, I think he's an Irishman. He knows Gary Hyde and stuff.
Yeah, I know him well.
You know him well. You know, it was Paddy was telling me some stuff on that as well, and going on to he was telling me basically about the Split Decision, the documentary that you're making or on the cusp of releasing. One thing that was a really kind of warming story was, although a bad part of the story, was when Rigo fought Willie Casey, and I believe your camera equipment was stolen. You're down to your last $1,000, and I'll let you tell our listeners as to what happened afterwards, and you know what transpired after you had a chat with Rigo about what was to come next.
Well, yeah, just before we were going to the weigh-in for that fight, a pickup truck pulled up to the team van where I was traveling with Rigo, and it happened so quickly, but they yanked a gym bag out of the back of the truck. The back of the van, rather, and what they were doing was intending to steal Rigo's championship belt, and instead they stole not only all my camera equipment, a laptop, and half the footage that I'd shot while I was in Ireland for that week and a half, filming him in training camp. But I mean, it was devastating in terms of I had nowhere to go to complete the film, and I'm not a gambler, but I noticed in the midst of, you know, the recession that was really, you know, Ireland was really badly hit by it, that there was such an abundance of betting shops. And I was curious about what the odds were for that fight because, you know, Willie Casey, despite being undefeated, I didn't, you know, his record was not that impressive in contrast to a two-time Olympic champion. So the odds were 20-1 that Rigo could knock him out in the first round, and everybody in the training camp begged me not to do it because Rigo is not a traditional first round destroyer. But when I knocked on Rigo's door, he just had one thing to say, which was bet your life savings on it. And after he knocked him down 3 times in the first round before the referee stopped the fight, the first thing he said when he saw me on the apron was, "Where's my cut?" And he just sort of held out his gloves. And that's all in the documentary. And actually, that was money that I used to go back to Cuba and interview his family and bring footage of him to his wife and 2 kids. And that footage is also in the documentary. So in a very literal way, he saved the film and allowed me to keep going, because without that money, I was dead in the water.
You know, obviously, I mean, is the documentary now complete? Is it close to being aired now? You know, is it going to be shown?
Yeah, it is finished. I just entered it in the Toronto Film Festival, but I'd love to enter it into some festivals in the UK and across Europe. It's just a challenge selling it off, because if you have made a film as I have that features a lot of Olympic champions, there's no worse entity to deal with than the IOC in terms of licensing their footage. They are one of the most litigious organizations in existence for licensing material. So I've got to sell it off in order to get it out and to show it to people. But I'm terribly excited to have an opportunity to do that. I'm just trying to find some places to sell it.
Well, we'll certainly keep our ears open, see if we can get anybody over here who might be interested, or maybe even point you in the right direction. You know, obviously, you said that you went to Cuba and spoke to his wife and his two children. You know, what was it like working in Cuba doing that documentary? I believe you were under constant scrutiny by the Cuban authorities when you were working over there.
Yeah, I think in Rigo's case, that house was probably the most politically radioactive in the country. I was told that the house had 2 security cameras across the street fixed on it 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. And the wife and kids were certainly unnerved by having somebody from outside Cuba want to talk to them. Now, they still did, but I had arranged to have a second visit with them to talk, and they hid inside their home. They pretended that they weren't there until finally Rigo's son said, "No, my family's gone away to visit a grandmother," or something like that. But it was clear they were there, and shortly after that visit, just things got very dicey with authorities following me and people in cars driving by pointing up at security cameras, which are all over Havana. So you just never know how close the authorities are to you. You're not permitted. The catch-22 in Cuba is that they say you're only allowed to talk to anybody to cover an important story if you go through the proper channels. But if you go through the proper channels, not only will nobody clear you to pursue the story, but then you're flagged from trying to talk to anybody. So I talked to many, many journalists who went over there to cover far less challenging material, who within 3 or 4 days were, a knock at the door at 4 a.m. and an escort to the airport. I was in danger in the sense of not just talking to Stevenson or Sabone or, prominent, heroes in Cuban society, but also talking to some of the younger people. For example, I did interview the star of that film that you mentioned, Christian Martinez, who was just a young, 16 years old when I caught up with him maybe 4 or 5 years after that film came out. But I was very curious to see where he was at, because part of what I think my book and the film try to do is use the reasons why Cuban boxers stay or go with all that money on the table as a means of looking at where Cuban society on the whole is going after Fidel. And so to catch up with that 16-year-old kid and just, see where he sees his future going, and to hear a 16-year-old boy who's a national champion already say, "I want to be better than Teofilo Stevenson." I was interested to know, what does that mean? Does that mean 4 Olympic gold medals, or does it mean leaving and trying to make the money that Rigondeaux was making, as a professional world champion? And that ambiguity is really at the heart of, I think, what fascinates me so much about this story, and really what I wanted to share, because I don't see much of that permitted in other stuff that's written about Cuba. I always find out about the writer or the filmmaker discussing the topic. I don't find much about the topic itself in terms of what I've seen going there. So I think really all I brought to the subject was my confusion, and I don't know that I resolved any of that, but I hope there's something worthwhile in that, because it's a very complicated issue, and yet I found it totally compelling. So I hope some of that's translated to the audience that I'd share it with.
What did when you spoke to Guillermo's wife? Obviously you showed us some footage of him, of his fight, or his previous fight at that time. What did she say? I mean, I think that'd be the first time she'd probably seen him for God knows how long. Is it? I believe they've been apart now for so many years. I mean, I remember Guillermo coming in for a lot of criticism after the Ricardo Cordoba fight back in 2011. But I'll let you tell the listeners again. Why was it a poor performance? Because I believe there was a lot of personal strife in Rigo's life at that time. I believe also he couldn't go back to Cuba because I think his mother had died or was on the cusp of passing away.
Yeah, well, one of the fascinating things about Rigo was the first defection attempt was during the Pan Am Games in Brazil in 2007 in the summer. And after that action, his father disowned him for being disloyal to Fidel and the revolution. But his mother was very sympathetic with his reasons for leaving and very supportive. So when he succeeded in defecting in February of 2009, very shortly after, his mother died. And he had done whatever he could to try and arrange being able to go back to Cuba to visit his mother for her funeral, and was told that he'd be put in prison if he ever returned to Cuba. And at the time of the Cordoba fight, he discovered through his wife that one of his children was seriously ill. And so what his wife told me when I visited her was that he was petrified that the same thing that had happened with his mother dying in his absence would happen again with his son, and that's what really impaired his performance, was that he wanted to play it safe, simply because if he felt as if he lost, during a title opportunity, that he'd left everything he'd ever known behind, and here he was, if he lost the United States, he felt he wasn't qualified to do any kind of work. He had no means of sending money back to his family. So I think he was just trying to protect what capital he'd earned, in terms of his stature as a professional fighter, and not take any unnecessary risks. But in the end, it completely sabotaged his career until that brilliant performance against Willie Casey in Ireland redeemed him, and then he just started on this wrecking ball track on the way to Donaire.
Yeah. I mean, what's obviously he's sending money back to Cuba. I mean, I take it the authorities are allowing his wife to collect that money, or are they any way interfering, or they maybe intercepting it?
The wife said that they had secret channels to get the money back. So, no, I don't think the authorities are thrilled by it, but he, according to her and according to him, is successful in sending money back. However, I have one caveat with that I think is interesting, is that I watched all the news footage because a lot of international media went into the house to inspect what was the state of Guillermo. Was he thrown in prison, or all these outlandish things that people expected to have happened to the captain of the Cuban team after an attempted defection. But I didn't see any new items in that apartment after his world championship. That doesn't mean he's not sending money back to them, but I just mean there was no conspicuous affluence in that apartment in terms of what he was sending back. So it's always hard to say. It just seems like there are no facts in Cuba. Everything is kind of a rumor, which is just very strange. There's no way to corroborate claims over there, but yeah, that was the state of things when I went there.
Well, just going on about how Rigo did eventually manage to leave Cuba. I remember reading somewhere, I think it might have been Gary Hyde, I remember being reading an interview, I think they eventually landed in Spain, I believe, and they were quite worried if they didn't get there in time because the people who were involved were quite shady or something, and they were quite worried for Rigo's life at that point. Was am I right in saying that?
Yeah, Gary Hyde was the first person to ever sign Rigo to a contract, which is ultimately what was upheld when he got to the United States, despite the fact that he left Cuba for Mexico and then found his way to Miami on somebody else's dollar. And so Gary Hyde, the first Cuban who was ever signed in Cuba and gotten off was who we were speaking about earlier, Mike Perez, who Gary Hyde also got out. And Gary Hyde got out 4 boxers in all. Guillermo was the last and also the first one he signed. Guillermo was had the most trepidation about stepping onto a smuggler's boat of any of the fighters that Hyde signed. So, I mean, that journey, I just think it can't be overstated how traumatic it is, because, I don't know about you, but the idea of having an amateur record of 400 fights against the best fighters in the world leads me to believe this is a very brave individual, and without any hesitation, he said, the journey in the smuggler's boat was the most frightening, traumatic event of his life.
He was committed at that point, wasn't he? There was no turning back from that, because obviously, was it twice failed to get away? Then surely they would have put him in prison if it failed, or.
Well, I think if money wasn't changed hands once he stepped in the smuggler's boat and shipwrecked into Mexico, where he's basically held hostage until a ransom is paid. There are many Cubans there who claim to be held at gunpoint. And as it's become more and more lucrative, the people who are holding you are, the worst of the worst drug cartel in Mexico, who've just diversified their portfolio from drugs to include human beings. And the estimates are that 10,000 Cubans, including some of these athletes, are transported every year on these smugglers' boats to Cancun, and a little island off the coast of Cancun called Isla Mujeres is the actual Cuban smuggling capital of Mexico. And it's just nightmarish stories of the conditions that they endure once they get to Mexico until this money's paid. There's either a machete or a gun pointed at them until somebody pays to set them free. I think is optimistic. They're beholden to the people who've paid for their transit, and they're being given a living wage until they can make money fighting. But what happens if they don't make that money back? They can be in debt for the rest of their lives. So there's another thing, another weight on their shoulders that they have throughout their lives in the United States. And you very rarely hear the media sympathetic to any of the conditions under which these people live their day-to-day lives, let alone the stress of being a professional fighter.
Yeah. I just wondering, Brin, do you know of what kind of security arrangements are in place for when the Cubans go abroad for like the World Championships or like the Cuban World Series of boxing team? I mean, obviously, the state's going to be very, very worried or very, very wary about their best talents, who they've reared for the best part of probably 15, 20 years. Them basically kind of just doing a runner on foreign soil and just turning up at someone's embassy looking to get political asylum, so to speak. What type of security or kind of surveillance do they put their pro boxers under? I don't know if you're aware of, how far they go with that type of thing.
I think they're very careful about it. They're very careful in terms of the indoctrination of the fighters leading up to travel. They really do want true believers, and I think potentially you could argue that the most indoctrinated Cuban citizens probably are the athletes, simply because, I think Cuban athletes amount to the most expensive human cargo on earth. I mean, there's $1 billion worth of athletic capital on Cuba today in baseball players and boxers if they step foot on any shore in the world other than where they live. And, with baseball, there's 6 or 7 people who could sign $50-60 million contracts tomorrow if they arrived in the United States. And I think the boxing talent has diminished somewhat because there's not as much money in the program as there used to be, with the Soviets subsidizing them the way there was in, say, the 92 Olympic team. I think after that, the money sort of had to ebb away, as it did all across Cuban society. I mean, the Cuban economy was in free fall. The black market economy was bigger than the regular economy in Cuba, and probably still is. So they're facing their problems, but I think what the coaching staff is really there to do, not so much with the security once they are traveling internationally, because it's not as if they're under lock and key. But it's really who's selected to travel internationally is where the real security measures are taken. And the other thing is, off the record, how much are those families going to pay if somebody steps away from the team when they're traveling internationally? There are no limits to how vindictive the government can be against the family's economic opportunities, or tightening the vice in terms of money that's sent home. You can't buy anything in Cuba unless you really have permission to do so. You can't And even if I send $1 million to a friend in Cuba, they can't buy a car. They can't buy a house. They can't do anything with that money in any significant way to improve their lives without permission, without risk of, a policeman knocking on their door. So that, I think that's where the security is these guys know back in Cuba, just every element of their lives is circumscribed by the state. So if you attempt to thumb your nose at the state, not just you, but everybody you know can be drastically affected, their lives can be drastically affected for the worse.
I mean, I take it there's no suggestion that the Cuban state is going to be kind of a wee bit more relaxed and stuff. I mean, if you go back to I think just before the revolution, you had the great fighters like Kid Gavlan and Kid Chocolate, obviously Benny Kid Paret as well. I take it there's absolutely no possibility in the near future about them allowing them to be professional fighters, let them go abroad, but as long as they're under, strict scrutiny by the state, that they definitely come back to the island. I think there's no possibility of that ever happening anytime soon.
Well, I think the other issue is that the embargo doesn't permit that to happen. It's like if you travel to Cuba as an American, there's nothing prohibiting Americans traveling to Cuba. By Cuban law, it's American law that forbids you to go there. One of the great ironies is that now Cuba, you're allowed to sell real estate, you're allowed to sell cars now, and there's an incredible amount of foreign investment in hotels and resorts, and the only country that's not permitted to do so is the United States. And it's not by Cuban law that they aren't, it's by American law that they're forbidden to engage in free enterprise in Cuba with investment. So it's one of the funny ironies that exists there. That I mean, you could make a strong argument that South Florida has delivered 2 elections to George Bush, and the only thing that voting populace really cares about is the attitude towards not the only thing, but a significant thing that voting populace cares about is that embargo being tightened even further than it is. For that reason, the embargo would have to be dropped for any of those Cubans to be able to make any kind of money in the United States, and then from the Cuban side, it would just be a question of how much money does the state get. Now, I think that's a lot more probable on the Cuban side, it being permitted, because they already do permit it with musicians and artists. Probably the most lucrative profession you could have in Cuba is to be an artist. Ironic coming, as I talk to you from the United States, where it's probably the worst profession to be in, to paint or something in terms of how much money you'd expect to make. But Cuban painters and musicians, if they have any international recognition or success, live better than anybody else that I've seen, because for the simple reason that they can keep more money than any other profession that's gotten internationally. So I could see it. I think in the foreseeable future some kind of compromise there could happen. Now, obviously they couldn't fight in the United States, but maybe there'd be more availability in them fighting internationally and being able to keep 10 or 20% of what their earnings are, which still by Cuban standards would be a fortune. So as I say, there's a precedent for it with the arts. I don't know that it would be that massive a leap to see it with athletics.
Brin, do you know, or I suppose you will know, but can you let us know, are you in any way blacklisted or banned from going into Cuba? Because, obviously you've been speaking with people who are under scrutiny from the state. Are you able to come and go as you please, or are you kind of effectively banned from the country now?
I think I just put up a video today, which is the first time I've ever shown my interview with Teofilo Stevenson, where he's on camera asking for money. You see him on camera drinking and smoking, and saying that he's broke. But I had a conversation with the Miami Herald shortly after Stevenson died, where they on their front page discussed that interview. So I'm pretty sure I can't go back. And the other feature that was just a really dumb decision on my part was having a bit of a fling with Fidel Castro's granddaughter that I don't think helped matters in returning to Cuba. But Yeah, I'd assume I can't, but I haven't rolled the dice and tried. But from what I've been told, I went quite a bit further than other journalists in terms of, I think it's one thing to have a print interview with Stevenson with what happened, but to actually see it, as I say, that short film just came out today. It's called The Greatest
YouTube?
Fight That Never Was. It's not on YouTube. It's on a website called SB Nation, and
SB Nation.
SB Nation.
SB Nation.
And it's accompanying an article called Heroes for Sale, looking at Teofilo Stevenson and the latest Cuban superstar defector, Yasiel Puig, who plays for the Los Angeles Dodgers. And that film is really looking at the consequences of the great fight that never was between Ali and Stevenson.
All right, I'm just looking for it just now, so I'll have a read at that. And it's there's a picture of him here sitting here with his cigarette, and he's got a pair of blue trousers on. Brin, I'm really grateful for your time. I had you on now for just over an hour. Just before I let you go, can you let our listeners know, is there any upcoming Cuban fighters on the island through the amateur ranks that we should maybe keep an eye on for future World Championships, Olympics, etc.? Or anybody who we know or you may know has maybe smuggled themselves into America, maybe coming up through the ranks through in the States?
Well, I think it would be drastically inappropriate to mention any names that would likely be coming to the United States that I've heard of, because some really unfortunate things could befall not just them but their family to disclose those names. I will say, I think the hero of that documentary you mentioned, Christian Martinez, was a superb talent. In the years since that documentary came out, he's progressed exceedingly well. And some of the others, I mean, we talked about Sabone's nephew, I think has the potential. I mean, he's still such a young kid. A lot of promise there. But I haven't seen that next Sabone, that next successor. I mean, that's what I tried to do with both the book and the documentary, was find that continuum of the most elite of the boxers. And I kind of viewed it as this sort of relay race of Stevenson handing the baton to Sabone, who handed it over to Rigondeaux. And what I was trying to look at as a kind of conclusion is who does the baton go to next? And what I think I concluded is the baton goes to the Cuban, as you're suggesting, who comes to the United States before he's had the long, illustrious amateur career. Because I just see that as the trend, that as the way things are now, it's very difficult to imagine those Cuban youth not wanting to pit themselves against the best of the best by turning professional, either like Mike Perez going to Europe or coming to South Florida. So, yeah.
Very interesting, very interesting. Brin, I'm going to read this article. It's very, very lengthy, so it's going to take me a wee bit of time to go through it. Just before I let you go, can we just get you to kind of read out, for instance, where we can get your book, about your documentary, and where people can hit you up on social media to discuss anything, all things Cuban boxing?
Absolutely. The book is called A Cuban Boxer's Journey, and it's available where any books are sold from retailers around the world, Amazon, Barnes & Noble, etc. I'm on Twitter under Brinicio. I was new to social media, so I chose a very bad handle, unfortunately, but I'm going to have to live with it. The documentary is called Split Decision, and as I mentioned, I'm hoping to enter it into a number of festivals and get it sold and get it out to the public as soon as I can. I'd love for them to see what was a real journey for me over 4 years to get the film made. I never imagined meeting Rigondeaux in 2007, shortly after the failed defection, that 5 years later the guy would put on a performance like he did against Donaire in Radio City Music Hall. It was extraordinary to see, and trying to sort of put together how he got there based on the Cuban system was the backstory that just fascinated me. So yeah, I think that's about it.
Yeah, Brin, I've got to really thank you for this, mate. I mean, it's been a real education for me to understand a wee bit more about a world that's, you know, in all honesty, it's kind of closed to me. I mean, obviously I live in Scotland, so I don't really get a chance to understand a wee bit more about the political situation in Cuba. You know, I can only go by what I read on the internet and watch fights, etc. But this has been a real education for me, and I'd like to thank you because our listeners will get a real treat from this on the show on Sunday. So I've got to thank you for your time, mate.
Oh, it's my pleasure. I'd love to get this story out to, you know, there's a lot of people who care about it, so it's a real pleasure to be able to reach as many as I can with it.
Yep. Anyway, mate, I'll let you go at this time, but very much appreciated for your time. Thanks very much.
My pleasure. Thank you.
Cheers, mate. Thanks.
Bye-bye.
Bye. Also, you know, coming on, we've actually got an interview here from Steve Wellens from the Irish Boxing Review. He's speaking to Matthew Macklin last night, and he followed us on. I think it goes on for about 5 minutes. So here is Matthew Macklin speaking about his career.
I'm not sure yet, but it looks most likely I'll fight the end of August in Dublin. Hopefully a world title eliminator. That's not confirmed yet, but that's the plan.
Sergio Martinez fought on the weekend. What do you think was fighting against Butler? He looked very...
Yeah, he looked shot more, didn't he? You know, he's been a great champion, but probably his better days are behind him now. I think. You know, he twisted his knee against Chavez, I think he's done his cruciate ligament, he broke his hand, and then the same again against Mark Murray, and 2 fights in 2 years. At that age, after coming back from injuries, probably, you know, I think, you know, I doubt we'll see him at top level again.
Up in Belfast, I think it was Carl Frampton. What do you think of Frampton? Have you seen him in action? What's your thoughts on him?
Yeah, I think Frampton's a great fighter. I think I wasn't 100%, I wasn't sure if I was sold on him or I wasn't, but when he fought Kiko Martinez, Kiko really come out and put it on him early doors, and he wasn't phased, he was toughed up, kept a nice defence, picked his punches well, and then when it time to step it up, he did, and then produced a beautiful knockout finish. I think it was the 8th or 9th round, so he even had the power later on in the fight, and obviously Martinez has gone on since then and won a world title, but I think on September the 6th, I think Frampton will do the same. I think he'll beat him again and become world champion.
You think he'll be our next Irish world champion?
I think so, yeah. Well, he's fighting Martinez September the 6th. He beat him before, and I don't see anything that Martinez can do differently to improve on that. If anything, I think Carl's probably gone on and improve more, so I think if anything, he'll defeat him more decisively.
Martinez is talking the talk, but when a guy stops you like that, is that in the back of your mind when you go back and face him again?
I mean, only Martinez knows how he prepared for the fight, or, you know, if he could improve his preparation, but, you know, he really put a lot of pressure on Carl Frampton. It looked like he wanted to be the experienced guy, bullying the younger fighter that night, but he didn't phase Frampton, he just toughed up. He showed his experience beyond his years, and, you know, as the fight went on, he showed his class, and the knockout finish was brilliant, especially late on in the fight.
Well, it's great for Irish boxing to have another world champion, so hopefully you can continue.
Oh, definitely. I mean, you know, I lost to Felix Stern. Well, I didn't lose him, I beat him, but I didn't get the decision. But Felix Stern was Felix Stern over in Germany, and then, you know, Martinez, when I fought him, was considered, you know, number 3 pound for pound, only to make on a Pacquiao. Fight was different tough up until the 11th round. Went out to see him a little bit, and then, you know, obviously Golovkin beat me with a body shot, but knowing him wants to fight Golovkin, he's probably outside of Mayweather the best fighter in the world. So, you know, I think I'll come back with a good win there before Christmas. I think another fight here now in August, and, you know, I'll be ready to fight whoever then.
Do you think Golovkin will beat Daniel Gale on July the 26th?
I think Golovkin will beat anyone at £160 and possibly 168. I think the only person that could probably beat Golovkin would be maybe Andre Ward, and I think no one really wants to fight either guy, so I think somewhere down the line, that's probably one of the most intriguing fights in boxing, for me anyway.
What's it like fighting a guy like Golovkin? You've been in the ring, you've faced up to him. What does he do so well?
I think his footwork and his ring gentlemanship is excellent. You know, he's very good at closing the distance when he wants to. He's good at putting the ring off, putting a lot of pressure on you without even really doing much. You know, I remember after like 2 rounds, you know, I was under a lot of pressure. Not blowing heavy, but I was under pressure. I was definitely under the cosh, and he hadn't really broke second gear, so you know, I thought I had to change things and try to turn it around and, you know, come up with a good shot in the process.
You haven't fought in Ireland since 2009 when you fought Rafael Sosa Pintos. I was ringside that night. How important is it to fight in Ireland again?
I can't wait to fight back in Ireland now. You know, it was brilliant to go over to America and get involved in big fights. But, you know, having lost to Golovkin and Martinez, come back with a win last time. But I think, you know, it was good to get the 10 rounds, and I want to get another couple of good wins under my belt. You know, get some momentum going and then get another crack at the world title. And I think, you know, doing those fights here in Ireland is important to me, and I think it's the place for it to be. I think Irish boxing fans are among the best in the world, and I think there's a great boxing, you know, up and coming professional boxing scene here. The amateur scene's always been brilliant, but I think there's a good professional scene coming here, and I think, you know, the likes of Frampton up in Belfast headlining shows, and myself headlining them in Dublin, you know, it's good for everyone because it trickles down and it keeps everyone active.
Just one final question for me. What did you think of Andy Lee's performance against Jackson, particularly the knockout?
The leap's going. I thought the knockout was excellent. You won't get many better knockouts than that. I thought up until that his performance was leaky, but the knockout was brilliant, so he turned it all around.
Thanks very much.
Right.
So listeners, that was Brin-Jonathan Butler there. Very, very eye-opening interview, and he's actually got an article out at present. We've actually got it posted on the site. You can't copy and paste it, you've got to go to the link directly, and it's about Teofilo Stevenson, and I forget the baseball player's name, but it's a really insightful interview and article about, you know, what these guys got to go through, getting held at sometimes, you know, knife point, gun point and stuff. It's a multi-million-dollar industry, this kind of, well, it is classed as human trafficking, but it also, the inside knowledge about, you know, a part of the world, you know, everybody wonders why the Cuban aspect of boxing is you know, why they're so successful. You know, Brin's just basically told us how it's successful, and you know, the reasons why some will want to stay, they buy into the ideology of the Cuban way of life, or some want to kind of leave and make a better life for themselves. We've not really got much action on again next week, so we're just going to cover, I think, Tommy, you're shooting away, mate, so we'll catch you later, bud. We've got some news here. David Hay has mentioned he's looking at a ring return in Dubai. Any other information on this one, Kurt? No,
I mean, I think it's obvious that he's going to be back, but I think all this talk, I mean, we've heard Dubai mentioned quite a few times. I think we talked to Shannon Briggs about it as well, and I think there's some interest in them staging fights, but it's just been a lot of hot air lately, and I think Hay will make his return, but when is he? I think he's been talking about October, November. He'll be over here, won't he? Probably at the O2 Arena, I'd imagine, or the MEN.
Yeah. Just to let listeners know, as I just noticed there, Hernan Marquez got stopped in the 11th round last night against McJoe Arrow, and I believe that was for the IBF number 2 spot at super flyweight. So, Alistair, looks like that beating that Marquez took against Segura just at the tail end of last year's maybe just, even though he's only 25. He's only past his best now.
He's only 25, but he's had a hard career, isn't he?
Yeah. That he has been in some brilliant fights. He also didn't mark Donaire stop, and they dragged him up the weight classes to fight Donaire, which is just comical. Comical, but not in a funny way. And then he had a hard fight with Brian Valoria as well, where he just gassed himself. And then he had those 2 absolute wars with the Panamanian fighter, whose name has run out of my head.
Carlos Tamara, was it the Colombian guy?
I thought it was you might be right. It had like 6 knockdowns in it. Unless I'm getting him confused with somebody else.
I do remember the Valoria fight. I remember it being pretty brutal. I mean, I think he tagged Valoria quite hard, and then Valoria dropped him very, very heavy. I think it was the 5th round.
Yeah. The first Luis Concepcion fight, that was brutal as well.
Aye, that was another brutal fight. That was probably one of the fights for contender for fight of the year for 2011 or 2010, I think it was.
He's got some miles on the clock. Why did he come up again? Sorry.
I noticed he got beat there last night. There was a 11-round stoppage. It was he moved up in weight. He said that he was struggling to make weight against Segura because his lifestyle, so he was going to try and change his life and stuff. But he's moved up in weight, it seems, and he's been stopped against this guy in the 11th round.
Yeah, it's hard to say. The guy's got an alright. He's 15-0. His name's McJoe Arroyo. I haven't seen the fight to gauge whether or not he just lost to a better operator or whether it is just the miles on the clock. You know, neither would surprise me really.
Yeah. That was his first 12-rounder last night, Matt McJoe.
Another thing as well is, I know next week he's going to be fighting Martin Murray, but do you remember when Sky did that programme, the gloves are off about the middleweights?
Yeah.
It weren't too long back, was it? About a year ago, if that?
If that, aye. I had Andy Lee,
Barker, Macklin and Murray. I mean, they were like hyping that show as if like to try and make their fights like these guys will be world champions of. We've looked in less than a year. Look how it's all changed now. I mean, Andy Lee, I know he scored a great knockout, but he didn't look very good. Barker's obviously retired. Macklin is in limbo at the moment. Don't know what he's going to be doing. And now Martin Murray's signed with another promoter, and he's in Monte Carlo fighting for silver titles. So, it's just a shame that Sky obviously wanted to look at those fights to make and match them, but it looks like we're not going to see any of them.
Now, also, I'm just looking for any other news. Did anybody see about the potential lawsuit? I think Oscar De La Hoya has brought in a solicitor called, what's his name now? Somebody, Bert Fields. I believe he's quite prominent solicitor for the Hollywood A-listers and stuff like that. Is this I think this is going to get very, very messy if you bring in a guy like that who seems to be defending the upper echelons of society, basically.
Yeah, it looks like it's going to play out in court. We'll see what. It's a shame Donnie isn't here really, because he'd probably give more insight. But he is a high-profile lawyer in America. He's got involved with a number of A-list celebrities for sort of breach of confidence and defamation and so forth. So we'll see. I mean, it does sound suspicious that it does sound like Schaefer's been in breach of his fiduciary duties. But I can't comment on like the American aspect of it. But in terms of not signing fighters up to the company that he's meant to be representing and allowing them to sign up with somebody else, and then allegedly trying to run off with Heyman, him being somebody else in the equation, it doesn't sound good, does it?
But he's still, Schaefer's still, is he still a shareholder in Golden Boy as well, that they said? So even though he's
understand
resigned,
that even though he's resigned, he's still tied to the company till 2018, is that right?
Yeah, this is why it's a bit confusing, because, obviously rumours that he's going to set up with Al Heyman or whoever, set up his own and, take everyone from Golden Boy. But then I saw a brief interview where he says, I'm still a shareholder, I still want Golden Boy to do well, obviously, because I'm still tied into the company. So it's all a bit confusing at the moment.
What else we got? Oh, obviously Kovalev's been confirmed to fight, what do you call him? Blake Caballero,
Australian.
So, I mean, it's a shit fight in all honesty, but I think I remember this guy coming out on Twitter saying he would take the fight, so fair play for the lad to take the fight. What about Brandon Rios against this Diego Chavez? This could be a good fight.
He's the guy who faced Furman, isn't he, Chavez?
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, he's a puncher as well, and if one thing about Rios is he's not hard to hit, is he? And he can take a lot, but he's easy to hit, and to me, he looks like he's regressed quite a bit, and it's only natural, I suppose, with the amount of fights he's had, and his style is not one for a long career, is it? So this is a tough fight for him, and it wouldn't surprise me to see Chavez get the win, but stopping Brandon Rios is obviously a very tough ask.
Yeah, I think Chavez keeps the left hand low, and he strikes me as more of a. He's not really a boxer punch because he's not that much of a boxer, but I don't know that he's an inside fighter, and I do think if Rios can close that gap down, he'll probably. It's really all in the right hand, Chavez's power, wasn't it? I think he could probably just fire his own right hand over the top of that low left on the inside, but it's at the mid distance where you can see Rios getting hit with something that hurts him. Quite a lot like Alvarado, actually. I'd say Alvarado's probably a better inside fighter than Chavez from what we've seen.
I mean, that guy can punch. I mean, that being the case as well. I mean, is it going to be one fight too many for Rios? Because, I mean, the guy's... I'm not going to say that he is, but he does sound like he's punch drunk sometimes, doesn't he?
Yeah, he's always sounded a bit like that, He just... he's got that thick accent, and he's a nice guy, but probably not. He's not always got something sensible to say. Let's put it that way.
Thing is, he had a lot of amateur fights as well. He's been doing this a long time, and although he doesn't seem to have had a lot of pro fights, he does get every fight he gets hit, doesn't he? And he's not going to have a long career, you can see, but he's got to try and get the big fights while he can. He's on a bit of a bad run, so he needs a good performance in this one. And he's obviously capable of doing it because, like I said, he can take a lot, and once he gets inside, he can really do a lot of work there. So I think it's a really good fight though, and this one will have a lot of entertainment in it.
Yeah. As I say, there's not really much on by way of terms of action next week, lads. I've been through the fight schedule there for Friday. Was it the 20th? Nothing much kicking around. I think there's an IBF light heavyweight title on the Eliminator. I think it's at Naj Mohammed Day. I think he fought. Did he not fight Nathan Cleverly at some point?
I think he did, yeah.
And he's facing Anatoly Dudchenko, IBF light heavyweight title eliminator. So obviously the winner of that will get a shot at maybe Bernard Hopkins.
I mean that's just showing the rankings again. I mean,
yeah.
If Hopkins, says, I'm vacating, who can really blame him? I mean, why that fight? It's just a joke, isn't it?
It's a freaking shocker. The card from Monte Carlo sees Mateusz Masternak fight Yuri Karlange. I think he's from the Congo, I believe. That's for the interim WBA cruiserweight title. Martin Murray faces Max Bursak for WBC silver middleweight title, and the WBA minimum weight champion Heikki Butler fights Pygmy Kotejim from Thailand. I'll tell you, one fighter I did notice come up on my list there recently was who was the Congolese guy that was going to fight Cleverly?
Makubu is his name.
Yeah,
Junior Makubu.
That's it. I see he's fighting Glenn Johnson in the Congo in a couple of weeks' time. I have to just double check the. Give me 2 seconds to check this.
That's a bit of a horrible fight, to be honest. Cause
yeah, there it's there. Yeah, it's in the Grand Hotel de Kinshasa in the Congo, 28th of June for the vacant WBC International Cruiserweight title. Ilunga Makubu, 16 wins, 15 knockouts, 1 defeat. He faces Glenkov Johnson. I can't believe that.
Well, it's sad to see, to be honest, because Johnson, it's a bit like James Toney. He's got a great chin, so that means he can take a hell of a lot of punishment. And this guy's facing, if you've seen anything of him, one thing he can do is punch. And if you remember the George Groves fight, I mean, Johnson was a punch bag in that fight, and Groves can punch. Obviously, it's super middleweight, but this is basically a heavyweight in the ring once they get in there. So it's a shame because obviously Glenn Johnson said he was going to retire after he lost to, was it Funfara? He lost to Funfara, and he retired, and he had a great career considering all the losses he had earlier on. Obviously, it must be financial reasons, I presume, that's keeping him going, but this is not going to end well for him, which is, he's not going to get knocked out in 1 or 2 rounds. He's going to take a lot of punishment, I assume.
Anyway, guys, I think the main card to really have a quick discussion about is the fight, is a couple of fights from California, from the StubHub Center in Carson, California. Oscar De La Hoya, Golden Boy Promotions are showing Sharif Boger. I imagine that'll be a shit fight against Hector Velasquez. Chad Dawson makes a return against one-time Jean Pascal victim George Blades. This guy's 39 years old, actually. I mean, I suppose, if we want confidence building for Dawson, this is going to be the fight to take, isn't it?
Well, yeah, but the thing with Dawson is he'll probably just jab him to death for 10 rounds and he'll probably get booed out the arena again. So, I mean, that's Chad Dawson for you.
Alice, are you excited for this fight, mate? Devin Alexander against Soto Kras?
Nah, not at all. I hope Soto Kras knocks him out.
I tell you what, I wouldn't be staying up watching that one, actually.
No.
Main event, Robert Guerrero makes his return. I think it's a 12-round fight. There's no title involved against Yoshiro Kamage from Tokyo, Japan. The one fight, though, we're kind of all looking forward to is for the vacant WBO featherweight title against Gary Russell Jr. taking his I'd probably say a step up of some sort against the amateur legend Vasily Lomachenko. I'm going to go into a limb here, guys, and say this is a crossroad fight for both fighters. I mean, Lomachenko's went out in the line there against Salido. Maybe slightly arrogant, didn't need the rehydration clause to make sure that Salido didn't come in too heavy in the ring at the time of the fight. and paid the price for it. Gary Russell Jr., Alistair, you gave me some information that he is suffering from Crohn's disease, which makes it even all the more remarkable that he's actually a professional fighter.
Yeah, I couldn't find it verified anymore. I just remembered it being mentioned, and then I was watching that Showtime I Am a Fighter series, and he did mention how he didn't make the Olympics because he got very, very ill, and he alluded to having a serious illness, but he didn't say what it was. I just remember some posters, the forum posters at the time saying he had Crohn's, but there doesn't seem to be anything out there on the internet detailing that. So whatever he had something that was very serious and made him miss the year and made him miss the Olympics. Yeah, and if it is Crohn's, that's pretty debilitating.
Yeah, my mother-in-law suffers with that actually, and she's actually, sometimes hanging out in bed for like a week at a time.
Yeah.
Would you agree with me? It's maybe a crossroads fight for both fighters. I mean, Russell Jr. taking his first step up, that me being slightly kind of more heavy praise on Lomachenko, that being the case.
That's it's entirely fair. It still is the highest caliber fighter that Russell Jr.'s fought, and Lomachenko. Gary Russell Jr. can take a loss in his career and keep going forwards. I think if he loses this, it's not the end of the world. But I think the loss would be more damaging to Lomachenko because he really needs to prove that he's a goods. And I think this would be the second time that he's taken on a very ambitious fight, and people will just lose patience with him. Albeit that he's doing something that's quite commendable. He's taken two very difficult back-to-back fights. He's learning the hard way. In fact, the very hard way. If he loses, I think people won't. Boxing fans today are just quite fickle and won't be so forgiving this time round. But that said, I think he's probably got the goods to do this. He's got better head movement and better foot movement than Gary Russell Jr., who is impressive. He's got very, very fast hands, but he's actually quite statuesque. He's very upright. He doesn't move his head. His foot movement isn't that great. So we'll see. It's also two southpaws, isn't it? I think.
Gary Russell Jr. is a southpaw, yeah.
Yeah, so they should mesh quite well. We shouldn't get any of that awkward, those awkward exchanges where you get southpaws and orthodox fighters fighting.
What do you think then?
I'm going to go with Lomachenko, but it wouldn't surprise me either way. I feel that having seen Lomachenko in with such tough opposition in Salido last time, we've actually got more to quantify what his faults and weaknesses are and his strengths are than we do for Gary Russell Jr. Perversely, who's had 20 odd fights, but he's just been in with guys that you will look good against. So I think we've actually had a more honest appraisal of Lomachenko, and I think Lomachenko looks to be the better fighter all around the board, I think.
Kurt, do you think maybe the hand speed of Gary Russell might cause Lomachenko some problems early doors, or do you think Lomachenko will maybe start slow? I mean, against Salido, it took him maybe about 6-7 rounds to try and figure out what to do, and in the end he started to get into the fight. I'm just thinking maybe left it a wee bit too late in the last round to try and go for the stoppage.
Well, yeah, I mean, that loss, obviously he's going to learn a lot from. He did start way too slow, but again, you can think Gary Russell's a better boxer than Salido, which I think he is, yeah, of course. But Salido brought in different things. He's a veteran. He knows all the tricks, and he was huge in that ring against Lomachenko, and he used all his physical strength, to push Lomachenko back to make it a tough fight for him. Russell Jr. is not going to do that. He's going to be a boxer type, and Lomachenko, in 300 amateur fights, I think will be more accustomed to the style of Russell Jr. than Salido, who was a bit of a shock to him in the program. But it's a tough one for the loser, to be honest, because whoever loses this fight, no matter if it's a great fight, a close fight, whatever, they're going to be called a hype job. And I don't think that. I know we've been critical of Gary Russell Jr. because you're always a bit wary of a guy who obviously looks like he's got all the tools. You see him fight, and he looks a great, exciting fighter. But when they're held back and they're not really pushed, despite being with a very powerful promoter, you always get the impression there's something in the gym that they're seeing that we're not obviously seeing, that they're still a bit not unsure about. And he even if he lost Lomachenko, he could go on to do good things, but he's going to be called a hype job. And it's the same with Lomachenko. I mean, he's already been called a hype job despite going in with a really tough fighter in Salido. And maybe he was hyped too much, but for his second fight, he was the one finishing the fight strongest as well, and he had Salido hurt, and he just left it too late. But I think the pressure's on him. He needs to perform and win this fight. And like you said, Russell Jr. can come again. So can Lomachenko, but fans today are not very forgiving. And if he goes 1-2, it's not good luck. I mean, it doesn't matter that the quality fighters he's lost to. It's still 1-2, and it doesn't look good on the record. So he's going to need. I think he's going to need a performance, and I think he will win it. But you can't count Russell Jr. out in this one. It's a really exciting and interesting fight, and I didn't think they'd make it, but I'm glad they have.
Prediction?
I think Lomachenko on points.
Yeah, I'm kind of aging that way myself. Actually, I just think I know Russell was a decent amateur in his time. Lomachenko probably top 10 pound for pound best amateur of all time. I just think, because of their amateur styles and that, I think you can maybe end up with a wee kind of a slight amateur fight here. But some people will probably argue the fact is as well as Russell's more ingrained into the professional system now. You just don't know if the Salido fight has done Lomachenko a lot of good, or if maybe the confidence is maybe being bashed. I don't think the confidence will be too bad. But I expect a kind of very cagey start to this fight, actually.
Yeah, I mean, Russell Jr. He's had about 32 fights now, I think.
24 fights, I think it is.
I thought it was more than that. Well, he's had quite a lot of fights, but in all of those fights, I've never really seen him tested or have any. He's been facing guys who are there to make him look good, and that he's been built up on, a bit like Deontay Wilder, facing guys who really are just there to be beaten up by Russell Jr. And he hasn't really fought anyone to really test him, and he's going to get that now. And like Lomachenko, against Salido, if he makes a mistake, he should be punished for it, because he's in against a guy who, can win. And so this is why it's such an interesting fight, because both guys are going to have to be at their best, and it's probably going to be pretty cagey for most of the fight.
Can you imagine if Lomachenko loses this fight? What some of the troll mercenaries are going to be on this case hard as you like. Overrated. Liking the difference between the pro and the amateur game and all that sort of shit.
Yeah, but it's like the fighter can't win. I mean, that's today's fans. You can never win. If a guy fights, look at Wilder. He's fought absolutely nobody, and he rightly gets criticised because he's going to get a title shot basically off beating absolutely nobody. But when a guy wants to fight the best straight from the off, which it might be proven to be a mistake. I mean, look at Rigondeaux. Everyone knows how fantastic he is. But if you look at his first 4 fights, the guys he fought were nobodies really. They were just getting him used to the pro game. So even he wasn't, was comfortable with, going in with, a top opponent. But Lomachenko has, and he'll live by it or die by it. But he's gone in there, and even after the Salido fight, they could have said, no, let's go down a level, but he isn't. He's going straight in, and the confidence is obviously there still. So, like I said, yeah, he might have lost against Salido, but there's a lot of positives to take, I think, from that fight for him. And like Alistair said, I mean, in that one fight, we've seen Lomachenko be tested and end the fight pretty well, I thought. We haven't really seen that yet from Gary Russell Jr. Now, he might go in there on Saturday and look absolutely sensational, but we haven't seen it yet because of the guys he's fought.
Yeah, that was the reason why my thinking was basically saying that it's probably a step up, even though Lomachenko's only had 2 fights. This is again, he's probably considered one of the greatest amateurs ever. So I think you've got to give that bit of respect to him. I mean, you don't win the Valbecker Trophy for nothing, and you don't win 2 gold medals just by turning up and just deciding to dance around a bit of ring. But anyways, guys, I'd like to thank you for your time. I'd like to thank Alistair McDonald, Kurt Ward, and the big boss man Tommy Allen was on for a bit there. He's way back to bed. Donny Baseball's failed to turn up this week. He had promised us he would be on this week. I'd also like to thank Steve Wellens in absentia, because forget it was the Matthew Macklin interview, and I hope the listeners liked the interview with Brin-Jonathan Butler. Anybody listening to that interview, any contacts about interest about buying that film and getting it showed in the UK, then please let us know and we can try and get something sorted out. I've been your host, Annie Patterson, and we'll see you next week. Cheers.